this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. Everybody's doing good, I hope. I'm doing good. Everything is good. Even though I know this show is a little bit staggered, whether you listen to the video or see the video and the podcast, we're coming up on Halloween. We're about 10 days out. And like I said before, I'm going to do a live stream on Halloween. And I'm even considering, one person was saying, do the 1980s nostalgia tour of, because, the 1980s had all those crazy movies that came out, like, Friday the 13th, Michael Myers, you name it. That was like, yeah, they made a lot of movies after that based on that. But that was like the, how can I say, that was like the start of a lot of these characters that became like pop icons. So yeah, I might do the live stream, something along those lines. Like I said, there's a lot of nostalgia when it comes to Halloween. Sometimes it was just as simple as going around and trick-or-treating, and nowadays it's just a different thing altogether. But let's see what I put together. So don't forget, even if you get this after the fact, I am going to have a recording, both the podcast and the video version of that live stream, so you can go back and look at it. And again, I want to remind you to sign up for my Substack newsletter, because again, on there I announced when I was giving away the free books on Amazon for the last book that I released on October 4th, The Phantoms of the Follies. And that's usually where I announce, like, whether it's live stream, book giveaways, new projects, requests for ideas for titles, even, storylines, anything. It seems to me like the Substack newsletter is great. Plus, usually I also include, besides crazy little articles here and there about weird stuff, I'll pull out some of the older video of like maybe 5 years ago that are still super interesting from great guests. But anyway, there's that. And don't forget, my chicken stuff is on TikTok. That's all I do on TikTok, just strictly chicken stuff. Just look it up as Chickenista Lady, and you will find me there. And I post all my adventures in chicken land. So anyway, guys, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who the guest is today. And this gentleman, this is his first time here on Stories of the Supernatural, and his name is Bobbie L. Brown. And him and his wife Sara reside in Southeast Montana. In 2010, Bob was led to serve in the field of the paranormal and begin his investigations. He started Dweller in the Cellar Paranormal Investigation in 2013 with the focus of helping those who need it. He wrote a book, The Paranormal Hammer: Clear Answers in the Murky Realm, in this year in 2022. And this book is a culmination of years of research and experience. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Bob?
I am excellent. Thank you for having me on your show.
On the contrary,
it is
it's my
good to be here.
Yes, it's great. I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody, because it's like, how did you get involved with this? Because I know everybody's got a different road.
How do I know? It just happened. And
okay.
I think, when we have a paranormal experience, I think a lot of us don't even know that it happened.
Yes, I agree.
And I did a little research on you too. I was watching your show because I thought, well, I want to see how she interviews and things like that. And so I do have some questions for you about that.
Sure.
But how I got into it, my wife called me. I was working away from home a couple weeks at a time during that uh, time of my life, and she said, "Well, you want to go to a haunted house when you get back?" And shoot, I don't know. Okay, and so we went over there, and we didn't have voice recorders or anything like that.
Sure.
I had never even watched a paranormal show at that point. But the one of the ladies that went with us, she had a ring on a necklace, and so we'd ask questions, and we'd ask a question, that ring would be going clockwise, and then it would stop and go the other
Okay.
way for a no or yes or whatever it was supposed to be, and that's really what kind of piqued my interest, and so that's how from there I started watching some of the paranormal shows on TV,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, well, that is really cool. I would like to try and you know get pictures. I want to go because I've got the elk in the background here, and
Yes, I
I
see that.
I I've been hunting since I was a little kid, but
Okay.
so ghost hunting isn't really that much different. The only thing is, you're not bringing any meat home. So, but the excitement is there, the adrenaline is there. When you get that
Okay.
capture, you have that occurrence, then yeah, I mean it's incredibly exhilarating, and it's always a surprise. And we see the same thing when we're hunting, like when we're hunting varmints or things like that. It's you never know where they're coming from, when they're coming, and sometimes you've been there a while and you stand up and they've been there the whole time. And so it's the similarities are so
Don't
close.
you ever have moments of no shows? Nobody shows up. It's like
Yeah,
almost.
all the time. There's more of that than there is the other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really is pretty cool. But so that's what got me kind of put the hook in. It wasn't my first experience, but it was the one that kind of got me down the road I am now.
Prior to this, looking back, because what you said was on spot. Many times people have paranormal experiences, and in that moment, sometimes you do, sometimes it's in your, but sometimes you rationalize it. It's not till later
Mhm.
that you realize, man, that wasn't right, or that wasn't normal. That was paranormal. Did you ever
That was
have that
weird.
prior to that? Yeah, right. That's weird.
Yeah,
Did you ever have like that experience before?
I did when I was little, and it's in the
Okay.
beginning of the book. The that experience, and I had I was asleep. I think I was 10, and I was asleep, and I'd moved down into this room, and I had never had any nightmares or anything like that, and I was wide awake, and when I woke up, I don't know why I woke up, but I woke up. Um, the I called it the devil was he was inches from my face, just
Okay.
hovering there, and I was terrified. I tried to scream, that scream that you can't get any. You can hear the air, but you can't get anything out. And I was
Okay.
so scared. My parents' room was right above me,
Okay.
and it didn't want my parents to know it was there. And it told me, it said, if you scream, I'll take your soul. And I was
Oh
like,
my God.
and so I'm sitting there, and I couldn't move. I just and this thing it would kind of look down and drift off, and then it would get right back in my face again. And it was I don't know why I thought of it, but I thought, well, I got to do something, and so I couldn't scream, so I started to laugh,
Okay.
and this thing instantly. I know you have dogs, and you've seen that look. Instantly, it
Yes.
went. You know, it
Uh-huh.
cocked its head and looked at me, and I just kept laughing, and it just kind of moved off slow. And I remember it drifted off into the corner of the ceiling there, and I never saw it again.
And you know what?
And
That is, I have to admit, people don't think that laughter does that, but it does when it comes to the paranormal.
oh, I didn't know what to do. I was so
Let me ask
terrified.
you, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. You
Okay.
said you moved into this room. What was it? You had slept somewhere else before and you
Well,
went there, or what?
my sister and I had shared a room up to that point,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I moved into this downstairs room, and I loved it down there. It was. It was
Okay.
great. Um, it was an older house, but we never, we never had any problem. Of course, in the '70s, you didn't know nothing about the
Right,
paranormal.
but prior to this, you had never had any
No,
experience. It was after you went into that room.
yeah, and that was the only time it happened.
May I ask you, was it by any chance the basement? And the reason I ask is, God, I hear so many stories that originate when people are in the basement.
You know, I don't know. I stayed down there for years. I
Okay.
never experienced anything else that was weird while I was down there. I never heard any voices. Never saw any apparition, any
Right.
shadows, no nothing. And when I talked to Mom, I asked her. She said she got a copy of the book, and I said, well, and I said, well, how? What do you think? She said, well, what does your wife think of this? and I said, well, Um, explained that in chapter 2. I said, "Well, how far did you get?" She said, "I didn't make it past the first paragraph." And I said, "What?"
Wow.
And thanks for your support, Mom. But that was that story, and she said that it never happened to any of the other kids,
Okay.
and she didn't believe me. And of course, when we know what we know about the paranormal is that it separates and
Yes.
isolates and divides.
And
There's
targets.
yes, and so through that we really but like I said, I did not know that that was a paranormal experience. It was just
Let
it
me
was
tell you
something that
something. I
happened,
don't
but I
know
never
how you were
forgot
able
it.
to sleep in that room again. I would have been like, "Hey, sis, guess what? I'm coming back up there." Guess
Well,
what?
yeah, you didn't know my sister. It's
It was like,
this is
which one?
actually
What's
this
with
is
it?
a better deal.
There's a better deal. Okay, that
Yeah,
speaks
you know,
volumes.
but no, it was for a while. It was you go downstairs and you're looking around over your
Oh,
shoulder and
sure.
stuff, but after a while, I just forgot about it. I didn't forget it that it
But
happened,
but
but
it
it
slowly
just
it
never.
fades. It
Yeah.
fades the that anticipation of like, oh my God.
Hmm. Yeah. And so, but I had a question for you. So
Sure.
the I watched the haunted hospitals episode.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and um, you were a state investigator,
Yes, I
correct?
was.
Okay,
Yes.
and so did you? At this point, you must have been pretty far along to go into a crime scene by yourself to gather evidence and things. And
Okay, let me explain. I worked for many years. I used to work weekends. And the reason why I did that, my we were the only team that worked the weekends, and we would have a rotating on call. Usually we worked till like 7 or 8 p.m. And if a case came in that was considered very like something along those lines of what's depicted there, a child death,
mhm,
it would demand an immediate response. So we had a rotating wheel. There was 5 or 6 of us on that team come and go.
mhm,
So every weekend we would have a two-man, like you go first and you go second. All right.
okay, mhm,
Which means after hours, we would have to respond to wherever it was, a
mhm,
hospital, a scene of whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So yes,
okay,
that's why we would end up working um, a lot of times those weird hours because of we were that one specific team that just did that work, which by the way was difficult because everybody else works that regular what do you call it, government 9 to 5 Monday through Friday deal.
yeah. So
Except
everybody's closed when you want to call somebody.
that's exactly, believe it or not, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
exactly what it was. So it was I don't want to say we were a specialized team, but in a way we were, because we were handling um, again something that required immediate, usually meant a really bad case.
Mhm.
Otherwise it would wait till the next morning till all everybody came in, and then they would just handle it on a regular basis. But something like that, yeah, whatever you had to, like, you got a phone call and you had to go.
So did you have to testify in cases and things?
Absolutely, of course. You
Mhm.
have to give forensic evidence. Absolutely, you do. You have to talk about, in other words, when you do these, people, don't realize, especially like in Florida, that we have what they call the sunshine laws, which means everything is transparent, with the exception of sometimes when it has to do with a minor, that they will
Okay.
not,
Mhm.
they'll not disclose names or stuff like that. But otherwise, there's transparency with court records, and everything you put together as an investigator. is subject. You have to testify in court. And, in other words, and when you're basically writing up something to turn over to the courts, as far as what you find,
Mhm.
you have to be accurate, because
Yes. It
a
affects
lot of
somebody's
times
life.
most of those cases, they end up, being shelved, but it is what it is. It's an official record
Yeah.
of, seen through the eyes of the investigator. I mean, there's a lot of hands in there as far as a case is concerned, but yeah, we're usually the ones at the beginning to look into what happened.
So
It's
now I know that's not your first experience paranormal wise, because
no.
you talked about when you stayed home from school that day on the X zone.
Yes, yes.
And but did that experience get you started in this field?
You know what? I tell everybody back. I remember when I was growing up, about the only one that had books on ghosts was Hans Holzer. All right. And I've always been a reader. I've always loved reading. And I remember that they would have, like, since I was 7 years old, they would have, in the library, where people would once upon a time used to go to libraries.
Oh yeah. I went to a library here a few years ago, and I asked the lady where the card catalog was. She looked at me like I had three
The-
heads.
exactly. Yeah, all these little index cards with these little.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I tell
But
people, and you'll get some stupefied looks, and it's like, okay, you don't get it, but the people that have been around do.
yeah.
But anyway, back then, they had the kids section. They would
Mhm.
have like a room where you would go. This was this huge library, and of course, they had a lot of ghost stuff and dinosaur stuff, and that's how I started reading Hans Holzer. But
Mhm.
it was just like kid stuff. And I was always interested in it, not overall, but it's one of those things that develops almost little by little. All right. Um, because to me, it was interesting. And I guess the same, when you're young and you're a teenager, there's always the scare factor involved. Like, until you get the real
Oh
scare, like,
yeah.
and like I said, when I had that experience when I was 16, I didn't really understand what was happening, because if not, I would have really been wigged out. But I wasn't. Later on is when I thought, it's like when I put, when you start putting all these episodes together, that
Uh-huh.
you realize, whoa, 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 this is going on.
Uh-huh.
But it was one of those things. Mostly how it developed was that back then, like I tell everybody, back then, it's not like you see these reality shows where,
Mhm.
the last thing anybody wanted was a van and a bunch of people to fall out, and with people with cameras, and your neighbors. And I tell everybody back then, one of the things, um without there being an official code of conduct, how's that,
Yeah.
usually it was a friend of a friend. There was no website per se that you could say, hey, I'm going to type in there and I'm going to look for a paranormal group. It was a friend of a friend, that it was like, hey, I please, nobody needs to know about this. And usually by the time they called somebody in, they had gone through a list of the plumber, the electrician, you name it. They
Hmm.
had already done all that homework. Like I tell, nowadays
Yeah.
somebody hears a weird noise and the family runs out and sleeps in the car. Back then, they when they finally got to the point of realizing that there was something paranormal or supernatural, they had already done all the ruled out all
Debunking.
the
Yeah.
possible natural explanations. All right.
Yep. Hmm.
Um, and again, confidentiality, contrary, because now everybody wants to be famous and have a ghost. But back then, like I said, I'll tell you, back then there was always more of a chance that when you arrived, there was absolutely something going on,
Yeah.
because they were at their rope's end. They really, truly were at their rope's end. And like I said, there was nothing to be gained really per se with being
Drawing
exposed in
you in.
this.
Yeah.
It's just, look, it's like right now I'm ready to hear an alternative that's going to help me figure out why this is going on or what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And it just develops like that. And then I started working for a foundation that covered the state of Florida. And I was always a freelancer. I would always, if I could, I would travel in the state. And a lot of times, if it was in South Florida, I would travel. And there was a lot of times, like I tell everybody, contrary to what you see, a lot of investigations take place on weekends, because this is when homeowners can receive you.
Yeah.
So some people that join team is like, what do you mean I'm going to have to give up my weekends? Yeah, yeah, you do. And sometimes nothing happens.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. So you got a lot of people that faded out, or at the last minute, hey, I can't make it, so I would fill in. And after a while, I got to work with people knew me and I knew them, the people that basically stayed on in this field, even when they moved to other states. I've gone to other states and done other things. And like I said, you just like every other thing, every other interest, people network. People that stick around after a while, everybody networks.
Hmm.
And you call each other. What do you think? Or hey, I need some help. Or hey, I'm short a person. Do you think you can come and help me out? I just need somebody there to observe, to take a temperature reading. And again, Bob, this was like I tell everybody, this was long before there was so much introduction of gadgets. And tell everybody, believe it or not, the best instrument that a paranormal investigator can have is a human body. I've been in multiple cases where I will feel something or somebody else. By the way, this is after you
Hmm.
attenuate your body, that you will absolutely feel something, and then 30 seconds, 20 seconds later, something will go off.
Hmm.
But you felt it even before. Um, so yeah, that's one of those things that develop. And like I said, in my experience, the more severe or the more, what's the word I'm looking for, authentic
Hmm.
in experiences, the more desire there is for privacy from who's
Yeah.
ever involved or having that experience.
You
There
know,
really,
and
really is.
when you talk about the body, in my years of hunting, so I hunted with a bow for probably the last 17 years, and so you're really, really close. And some of those animals, when they come in, they are so close, and they might not know you're there, but they know something is there.
Sure.
And
Hmm.
and you can see they are antsy, and they don't, because if they smell you, they're gone. I mean,
Right.
instantly. But they know something is near, and they can't put their finger on it, and so that you can see that they'll snort, and they might they'll be looking. They're always on the alert, and so um, in the paranormal, it's the same thing. Even in our house, which is new, we brought it out here, built it, but
Right.
we've had things happen, and there's been times where I know something evil was in the room, and it's just like, okay, Lord, and pretty soon it goes
Well,
away, once prayer starts. But
you get, and a lot of times I've told, and I'm going to say this, Bob, because I know a lot of times, and, and I think that not all the times, but in some cases they overuse the word demonic. And
hmm.
I've also explained you can have a human spirit, that this person, when they were alive, was a piece of work. They were evil. Hello, there's evil
Hmm.
human beings. Hello. And when they die, sometimes I'll have had investigators have gone into investigators and they say, "Oh, I feel something dark or malevolent," and they all think something non-human. Basically, come to find out, really what it is just a dark human soul. Okay, somebody that in life, because just because they died, how's that? Doesn't mean they instantly became good. Some whatever is holding them back, they were stuck. Maybe they're
Hmm.
even afraid of going to hell because they realize maybe all the things they did, this is what will hold them back. And I think that the longer that that person or that soul is stuck out of the presence of the divine, the more darker it becomes, or the more frustrated. And that's when you get a lot of people that have gone into locations, sometimes whether they're doing an investigation or not, and they get like that, I'm ready to run out of this building kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I tell them, it's not all the time is it non-human. You can have a human spirit haunting someplace or stuck or whatever it's doing there, that will really give you very, very bad vibes. Very bad vibes. Absolutely. Um, Sometimes people, and that's why, and I don't know what you think about this. I don't know if you've encountered it when you've done investigations where people sometimes want the group to come in and just tell them, yeah, there is, and try to ID the ghost for them. But it's like, no, 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 leave them here. Like they're all excited that they've actually got a haunting going on. Have you run across that when you've done any investigations?
um, no, not
Really?
really. It's just been that we have questions. You know,
Sure.
is this happening? Is this actually happening? Am I actually seeing it? I
Absolutely.
stayed in a shack when I worked up north there.
Hmm.
We had mice. That was awesome. But you know, so you'd be sitting there watching TV, and my dog Cheyenne, she would always be sitting in a recliner with me, and you'd be sitting there watching TV, and one would run out from under the stove, but it would just peek out and then head back, and so you'd be like, "Did I just see that?"
Right.
You know, and then and so it's the same. You think you're going nuts until in the morning. all the evidence is in the trap. But the
Sure.
with the paranormal, people just they want to know that they're not crazy. Um,
Yes.
I think that there is, when they get investigators in there and things that I think there can be a lot more questions than answers sometimes. Um, what, why is this haunting occurring? Who is it? And these things. And so I guess when I wrote the book, because when we get back to that, and that's why I was asking you about the evidence.
Hmm.
If you had to testify,
Yes.
because you know that is a very serious situation for somebody,
Sure.
and to be, and you said it, you have to be spot on, you have to be accurate. We can't just be pulling things out of the woodwork,
Of course.
and saying, well, that's, this is what I think it is, but you can't do that.
No,
And
you can't be. Really, you can't be subjective in this. I mean, up to a certain point, you have to. I mean, because you're a human being, you're not a
hmm
machine. You understand? But you have to base it on fact. If you're going to
exactly.
say, this is what I'm writing, I have to base it because of whatever it is.
hmm
Just
and
it's just
so
that, oh, I feel this is like, okay, why do you feel that way?
Sure. And so that's what my question to follow all that up was to ask, how did your experience as an investigator, state investigator, transfer over to the paranormal as far as your evidence analysis and things like that?
I was doing paranormal investigations before I ever became an investigator, and it's, believe it or not, a lot of people find it, but I'm a very analytical person, and I know how to how can I say, divide one thing from the other.
hmm
Okay. In other words, because that's what the job demands. All right. And it's like one of those things where you could be doing something, and it's not because you're looking for the paranormal and everything you do. It's just that all of a sudden it just drops on you like, what? But you realize
hmm
this is not going to serve the purpose of what I'm here for, or it's
hmm
going to do a disservice to whatever the goal is.
hmm
So you learn, um, you learn how to differentiate between one thing and the other. In other words, keep a very, very, and I've spoken about this before, Bobbie, in other shows. I've come across investigators. That's one of the things I learned early on, with that you have to. I'm not even talking here what you do for a living. That you have to have a very strict boundary between your personal life and
hmm
paranormal investigations. And sometimes I had run into investigators that they get consumed by this work. They want to do it
hmm
24/7, and you can't do that. You can't do that because basically, little by little, it
it
starts
devours
taking.
you. Yeah.
It does. It starts taking you over. It doesn't happen
hmm
like from one day to the next. Okay, so you have to keep. And I've even said it, and with a lot of investigators I've known for years, everybody will tell you there comes a point, if you're smart and you know what you're about, that you take a respite or a sabbatical. You step back altogether for a few months from doing investigations. It's like, don't call me. I don't care if the fire. Yeah, I can't.
yeah.
Don't. Like, unless you want
You
to
don't want
call
to.
me
You
and you
don't
want
want.
to.
Yeah.
Right. Unless it's a quick consult, I'm not going to be available to do anything.
hmm
All right. And you pull anybody that's done this for any length of time will tell you, because if not, it affects you. And
Yes.
I'm going to go there. It will draw in, well, I don't know how to influences, negative influences into your personal life. It will bleed into your personal life.
Sure. It allows
Undoubtedly.
those things. And
Yes.
um, as I've kind of researched you, and I've read through your stories, some of the stories that you've done, some of uh, the histories, like the Kempler School,
Yes.
um, and with West Point and things. So, I love the fact that you have really kind of looked at the historical side of a lot of these
Sure.
places, and haven't, you know, said that this is what it is because this is what we've seen.
Sure.
And so when I wrote the book, The Paranormal Hammer, that actually it was because I was watching Paranormal Caught on Camera.
Yes. I've
And
seen that.
yes, well, it's a good show if you watch it on mute. You know,
Okay. That's
you know,
great. Yeah, more, but it's after I got that show. I got to take it in small doses. How's that? 'Cause I
yeah.
do.
In fact, I can't hardly do it anymore. So,
Yeah.
But it so grieved me that people would say, the experts would say, energy, when why are you saying that? What what do we know about energy that you can say that? And so when I decided to do the book, of course, um, I became a believer. I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. Right, it was pretty close to the same time I started the investigations.
Okay.
And one of the things about following Christ is that the Bible talks about in the Old Testament, it says, do not seek after those who have familiar spirits and things like that. So I had to know for sure what I was doing. And
Sure.
am
Absolutely.
I allowed? Because if I was not, why am I involved in the paranormal? And
Exactly.
the if I'm just chasing after evidence, that is not
Hmm.
an acceptable reason for the Lord. And um, so that changed the whole perspective of things. And so I decided to look into um, what the Bible had to say really about spirits. Does it say anything about ghosts and things like that? And there's one about when Jesus was walking on the water, and then the disciple says, "Well, it's a ghost or it's a phantasm." Well,
Hmm.
um, but that doesn't show us anything. But the rest of the
Right.
Bible does, and
Okay.
it's actually very amazing. Um, and it's not in a hidden Bible code. It's really just in the stories. And uh, but when I decided to do this, I really wrote the book as a sermon, and it was horrible.
Okay.
There was a lot of
Right.
information in it, but when my agent Keith Carroll read it, he is a very wise individual. He was able. He said, "Well, bring your experiences into it. You've got to have these experiences."
Okay.
And so when we did that, um, it opened up, and it really opened up how I can relate the evidence that we see in the paranormal today with the stories in the Bible, and it's absolutely, it's almost word for word. And so,
Okay.
um, but when we look at the evidence, just like a courtroom, all the evidence has to agree.
Sure.
Uh, it can't. But there's also circumstantial evidence. We have to the culprit, the perpetrator, has to have the ability. He has to be available. He has to have the motive. All these
Right.
things have.
Exactly. You have to base it.
Hmm.
Well, but see, this is the difference, though. When you're doing, let's say, an investigation in the material world, you have concrete. You should have concrete evidence to show something. Whereas when you're dealing with the supernatural, it's not an on-demand thing. Okay.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
why I tell everybody, hey, I know these shows. Hey, you cut it out. Who's that doing that? One of my crazy dogs decided they want to scratch, make a hole to China. But anyway, I tell everybody, these shows, they got production teams and they
Hmm.
spend days there, and that's why every time they go, something happens. But I said, you could go to 1 week to do an investigation, nothing happens. You go the following week, and when I used to work with a foundation, they would first send out a scientific team
Hmm.
and try to disprove if there was anything paranormal. In other words, they wouldn't
Sure.
go in there right away thinking it's paranormal,
Hmm.
and only depending on what they found the first time would they send somebody another team. And who is that? Who is that? It's like, come here, Trouble. Of course, how appropriate, right? That's her name, Trouble. Then the Trouble.
Well,
Then
my dog is named Fiona, and they just had named a Category 4 hurricane after her. You saw it,
I
I
know,
think. So.
I know. Let me tell you something. When Andrew came through, my son was named Andrew, and he was like, "My son, my name," and it's like, be quiet." But anyway, the thing is this, that sometimes I've gone and the scientific team will tell me, and then we would go in there and it'd be like, what you guys didn't pick up? Sometimes things happen
Hmm.
and the timing is off for some reason. Just
Sure.
something is not there. You can't reproduce it. You can't go to a lab.
That's
You
what I'm
can't
saying.
say, hey, I'm going to have this happen. Here it is. It just doesn't work that way. And that's why paranormal investigations in and of itself, I tell everybody, the only way you really ever learn is by field work. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
can look at shows, you could read books, you could do this. That's great. I don't, but you have to do the field work and go through the boring ones and go to the ones where nothing's happening, or go to the one that you say, okay, you have a great imagination, but how do I gently tell you that that's all there is here? And then to something that, you know, whatever it is, the field work, because it's very elusive,
Mm-hmm.
elusive, for a
Just
variety of reasons.
just like
It
that
could be
elk back
anything.
there, you
Yeah,
know.
it,
And
it
so,
is.
okay,
I've told
so
people, and you could
okay,
have one. I tell them, it could be as simple as you have one investigator that looks like somebody that spirit knew in life. One person just looks like them, and it will trigger something. Not because you confront it, not because you ask questions, not because you do that. You know that. Hey, you know, all you need sometimes is one person that wasn't there the first time that comes in and they bear a similarity, they have a beard, something about them triggers a response that all of a sudden you get all this information. Plus, I tell everybody, whenever you have a paranormal team come in to do work, if you think that the only ones that are there or who are supposedly in there are the ones there, no. Especially being insensitive, you're going to put out an all points bulletin that any free floaters are going to try to show up because they're desperate. A lot of them are desperate to communicate. All right. And that's why sometimes people get disjointed or unusual EVPs or stuff like that. They're like, what? And it's like, what? Do you really think that the only thing that's here is what's supposed to be here? No, no, it's not. On the
you know, and that's
contrary.
so
I'm
the
sorry, go ahead.
paranormal. Sure, the paranormal is. It's not like we can reproduce an
No, you
experiment with
can't.
boiling water. But
Mm-mm.
what if we could? What if we could?
Oh boy, that would show. Now,
Okay,
you know
now
what?
hold on,
There's too
hold
many
on.
people making money on these paranormal shows. That will
I
buy
know.
you out.
All right, so I should. So I say you shut up right now, or you know, put my cards on the table. And
Right.
so in the paranormal, um, when I the the one investigation that I put in a book, well, there's two of them, but one, uh, we had several things that happened.
Hmm.
Okay, and you'll recognize these from any haunting. So
Right.
when we went in there, we went into the Hotel Alex Johnson in Rapid City, South
Okay.
Dakota, and they've got a ledger like this thick, full of stories of people who've had things happen.
Okay.
You know, we talked to a bartender up there. He said a whole slat of glasses just flew out one day at 10 o'clock in the morning. You know, the bar was closed, and
Okay.
you know he was, you know. But anyway, so we went in there, and it was my first attempt to capture evidence, and I had several full spectrum cameras, and I had just the regular video camera. Um, and so while we were there, or as we were leaving there, my wife developed symptoms where she felt nauseous, you know, and of course that could be food, that could be, you know, just about anything.
Sure.
Um, but then at the same time, she was also uh, emotionally up and down the ladder, and you've seen
Okay.
this too.
Sure.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so this lasted for about 3 days after we left. While we were there, we spent one night there, and so uh, while we were laying there, um, I woke up, and my wife, the covers were off her, and she was laying in the bed like a corpse. Her feet were together, and her hands were laid across her chest. And right before that, I had heard a human knuckle, just three taps on the headboard right next to my head, and that's what caused me to open my eyes.
Okay.
Okay, so when she got up in the morning, she went into the bathroom, and she had a little gold cross on a thin gold chain, and it was protruding out from her neck straight out. The cross was against her neck, so the chain was limp, you know, it wasn't pulled out, but
Okay.
it was just stuck there like that, and then it fell. And the door on the Amore, which had remained open, we had to walk by this door every time we come in or out of the room. And for the entire evening and morning, it hadn't moved. And we're sitting there talking on the bed, and all of a sudden it closed. And during that night, I had the REM pod sitting on the dresser, and it just,
Right.
it didn't do nothing until 1 o'clock in the morning, and then it just, went all out, and
Okay.
I was so tired by that time. I just got up and shut it off because
It's like, all right, we'll
the
take this up
whole
to the
night, yeah. And so the floor, we were on the 8th floor. The ninth floor is just a maintenance floor, and there's nobody up there. And the
hmm
whole night there is thumping and dragging and banging going on. Like there's a construction crew up there.
Isn't that is very typical?
And so we had those things happen. And then uh, when I reviewed the film, um, we left the main door open. I had the main video camera pointing into the room, um, and the door to the hallway was open. There weren't automatic doors, so we just left it open. And throughout that recording, you could hear the sound of children running up and down the hallway and giggling and laughing. And then later on in the film, or on the one of the full spectrum cameras, this was the real shocker, is that while I was laying in bed, I had it pointed toward the bed, and you can see the shadow figure manifest from the left side, right next to me. So,
Wow.
so when we look at these things,
hmm
we take, what can we prove? We can't. Can we prove these things have happened? I mean, we have audio recording, we have video recordings, we have experiential evidence. So, what can I prove? Well, can we say that it affected my wife physically or anything like that? Well, not we can't say that it did, but we can't say that it didn't.
Right.
So, first off, we have the ability to affect humans. Let's just say that. And we've seen this in hauntings. People that, whatever it is, has the ability to affect people either emotionally or physically through pushing, scratching, or worse.
Yes.
So we have the ability to affect humans. Second, we have the ability to make or understand human noises, and that is when we get an intelligent response to an EVP. We know the
Right.
sound people make when they're running down the hallway. We know the sound of children laughing. We know
Sure.
that's not horses or dogs or cats or a squirrel on the roof. And so that's the second thing. So we've got ability to affect people. Uh, we've got ability to make human noises or understand them. Then we've got the ability to affect the physical environment. And you've seen this too, where moving objects, cold spots, smells, things like that. So then we've got the fourth thing is the ability to manifest from an invisible state and become
Right.
solid. And you saw that in the haunted hospital.
Yes.
And so the fifth thing is the ability to affect the electromagnetic field.
Yes.
So we've got these five things, and in the book I call them the big five. These five things occur in every single haunting. And so the one thing that the big five gives us is repeatability. It gives us something to look at that happens in every haunting. So now
Right.
you and I have discussed the spontaneity of
Right.
paranormal and hunting. That means that it's not energy. We know about it, as much about energy as we do about marshmallows. And if I told you a ghost was a marshmallow, you'd think I was an idiot.
Right.
So,
I know exactly what you mean.
so, but we can't say something is something if we don't have something to back us up.
Sure.
And so when I'm looking for a creature that can do the big five, you know, a physical creature that we see on Earth. There's no physical creature that we know of that can do those five things from an invisible state, because the creator of that phenomena could not be seen in our room. Whether it's a knuckle
Right.
tapping or doing the necklace or making the footsteps or anything like that, we
Right.
couldn't see him. So the creature that we're looking for has to be able to create the big five from an invisible state, and that's got but the creature to do that has to fulfill not just the forensic evidence that we have in the big five, has to fulfill uh, motive, availability, and ability.
Yes.
And so when we look at the evidence that we have in the paranormal, it can be accounted for. And when we it gives us that ability to look at something, to look at a haunting and say, okay, these 5 things are occurring.
Right.
Whether I've got 4. I don't have the electromagnetic. I haven't tested it, and so I've got 4 of them. There's a pretty good chance that, okay, if you got those 4, and you've done all the looking at shadows, lights, everything like that. You've checked your home out, had people check your home out,
Sure.
and that you either have a haunting or you don't. And so that evidence should lead us, just as in a criminal investigation, should lead us to our perpetrator.
Exactly.
And
But
so, but what?
the thing is, well, it depends, because let's say let's go to the let's compare, like you said, to an investigation, like a real investigation,
Mm-hmm.
in a criminal investigation, whatever. Usually there's much more to go on as far as identity, which leads to motive, and motive as in your suspects. Okay, who would benefit? Which, by the way, in crime, usually the most difficult is stranger on stranger crimes, because it's very difficult to figure out who did this, what motivated the person. Those sometimes are the most difficult crimes to figure out, unless there's some type of evidence, because everywhere you try to find, like you said, the motive that
Mm-hmm.
will lead to a suspect,
Sure. And
it's
so
not there.
in a criminal investigation, they take the backlogs and the bookcases and all the cases, and they look at them, and they
Sure.
look for trends. They look for trends. Um, and I don't know if it's really true, like in The Blind Side, that they're doing the bodies under the Tennessee field, but they check bodies for the decomposition rates in different atmospheres and in different
Oh, you
environments.
know what? They've had, they've even had, this is the thing that, yeah, that even in Gainesville, they have here in the university, they've tested where they've put out human bodies that people have,
Hmm.
gone ahead and given their bodies over for science. And they've put them in different circumstances to see how they decompose,
Hmm.
different times of the years, put them in a trunk, put them under a tree, just to see how fast and what
Hmm.
type of insects, what occurs. All right. But that can be thrown off sometimes, the cold weather, or if that body's ever been frozen, to throw
Hmm.
the timing off as far as the composition. I mean, there's a lot of things, but that is
Sure.
so solid as far
Yeah.
as evidence. When you're talking to supernatural, usually the first thing you look at is, okay, unless somebody's seen something and they can describe it, it's like, who lived here? Who would be the usual suspect? Somebody that lived here. Let's start
There
with
you
that.
go.
Who lived
and
here?
that's and that's what
You
I'm
know,
talking about. Okay, so if we line our usual suspects up against the evidence,
right,
okay, how do they? If we just take the big 5, forget the ability, the
right,
availability, and the motive, okay,
right.
because say we're talking about a murder, or a robbery, it could be somebody who just hates. But so now let's oh, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, no,
I'll bring this back
you're
now.
looking like let's say that we're trying to figure out who is it.
Yeah, so
All
the
right,
usual suspects. Okay, so um, I think you and I can agree that energy is probably just as flimsy as it gets. And when we look at the big 5, because they can't
yes,
just account for one, they got to account for all 5.
right,
The ability to do all 5 in order to fulfill the evidence.
right,
So let's say energy's out. Okay, what about spiritual energy? Okay, well, remember, we can't just say something without having something to back us up. We
right,
have to provide some evidence for the explanation that we're giving.
right.
And so, what do we have as far as spiritual evidence? And one of the things that we really see in our culture now is evolution. Okay, and so that the start, I know that there's the alien thing. You and I are on the same page about the alien. Don't worry about that. But um, so if everything started and everything is physical, everything came from the physical, how did we come up with a supernatural spirit? We have to have some evidence. We have to have some proof for that in order to say, because one of the problems is if we can't explain life, how in the world are we going to explain death?
Well, I think that a lot of people sometimes, especially when it comes to hauntings or the paranormal, we understand is how can something incorporeal, no body, no that how we move things can move something,
Sure.
can
Hmm.
produce a smell, can knock, like you just said,
Hmm.
can even, brush or people that have scratch. How can something that supposedly has no body, how can they do that? Because us with bodies, we haven't gotten there yet, even though we try real hard, with the mental telepathy thing.
Uh-huh.
But in our world, the physics, the way it works is we
We
have to
can't
do
do it.
something. We gotta do it
Right.
physically. That's the only way.
Right. We can't
We
do it.
want to knock on the door. We can't stand and look at the door, and it's all of a sudden it'll knock. You have to go up to it and
Yeah.
knock. So I think that that's where a lot of people have that, and that's it's one of those things like what you figure it out when you're dead. It's like, okay, that doesn't help me when I'm alive,
Wrong. You can't wait that long. Um,
right? Of course,
you know, so, and I think that's what we look at the paranormal is we see it
of course.
from what we see. We take the natural and well, it's got to be like that because we know only people can make human sounds. Only people can understand human
Yes,
sounds. I
yes,
mean, you can train a parrot to say, probably want a cracker or whatever, but you know, you can train your dog to come to its name and maybe even get him to sit once in a while. Um, but we know that only people can do this, or can they? And so that's what we got. We still got to find that creature. And so, but like I said, none of the forensic evidence can disagree. And here's one of the problems. Okay, so like I said, if we can't explain life, how can we explain death? Is there any forensic evidence to back that up? And so here we have the millimeter. Okay, so many people, when they go into investigation, take a millimeter or a K2 or REM pod.
mm-hmm.
Now the REM pod, I can get it if I put my hand around the antenna, I can get it to go off.
Sure,
But that means I have to be in super close proximity to it.
yes,
But the millimeter and the K2 don't read anything when I'm holding it. Okay, where is the only place I can prove that the human spirit is? In my body.
of course,
So if my human spirit does not set off the millimeter or the K2, how can I say in a haunting that it is a human spirit? Because if we all get together, huddle around a millimeter, it still reads zero. So this creature has to possess enough power, because the only thing that I can get my my millimeter to really respond to is incredibly high power sources, like
right,
a heater blower motor or something like that.
mm-hmm. Right,
And apparently, whatever the substance is that does the paranormal is a different substance than me.
of course,
And
and
so this is what I'm talking about. That the evidence has to agree, and there are answers. And I'm not saying there aren't answers. I do have answers, but um, and so when we consider these things, and this when I was talking about the criminal investigation, how it can differ from the paranormal investigation. I think that if we disregard what we see in the paranormal,
right,
um, as opposed to our electronics, our experiences, um, all of the compilation of accounts. We talked about. Okay, so we can talk about the alien too. You have said repeatedly that you think there's an overlap, and
yes,
uh, in the book I had a list, and it was by a Dr. Carla Turner, um, and this was in I found it in a book by Gary Bates called Alien Intrusion.
okay,
And uh, Gary talked a lot about the hoaxes and things about the UFOs and the aliens, and I know there's a lot of people who believe in aliens. And let's face it, we've all just about all seen something. Something has to be causing it. We know
right,
that. We're not all fools and crazy, and
yeah,
we see things with our eyes. Why don't we believe them? And so something is causing it. But when we look at the list that Dr. Carla Turner came up with, what we see is almost identical uh, in the paranormal. Um, now, when we I'm sure you're very interested to find out where all this leads.
No,
So,
I'm listening to you because I'm fascinated. Go ahead.
okay,
Because I
so
definitely think everything's got an overlap. It's just that that's the that's the problem. The biggest overlap is that there's so many unanswered questions.
okay, um, well, let's see if I can find a. Let's see. Okay, here's one here. So this is out of the Bible, and I just want to. So keep in mind the big five, and I'll read this little excerpt here. Okay,
Okay.
and it's from Acts 12, verses 6 through 10. It says, "The same night Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison, and he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garment about thee, and follow me. And he went out, and followed him, and knew not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came in unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. And they went out, and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him." So, did you hear any of the big five in there?
Well, see, this is the thing. You have to understand that from the beginning, that's identifying the assistance of an angel, all right?
Okay.
Which in the Bible is already angelic help in the sense of God is known to send angels, for lack of a better word, on missions,
Sure.
whether it's a messenger or even striking people down. If you want to look at the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so it's almost like what can I say? Like everybody knows, angels have powers that humans can't. Even if you want to, are angels corporeal? Are they incorporeal? Do they look corporeal but they're not? But they still have the power to, and what you just described, rescue you from something that physically he wouldn't have been able to do by himself?
Okay, so if we just look at the big five, if we look at the ability to affect a person,
Yeah,
okay, so one of the things that we see in there is that there was two guards chained to either side of Peter.
right.
There was two guards right outside of his cell.
Yes.
Did you know those guards were executed the next day?
No. Oh, because his punishment for letting him
Yes, for letting
escape.
Peter go. So they were not having a pajama party with Peter. It was a serious deal if you
Sure.
lost a prisoner.
Yes.
So why didn't those guards interfere? Here's the other thing. So it says the angel smote Peter on the side. Peter was about to be executed next morning. He is sleeping very soundly. So, congrats to Peter. But the angel kicked him in the side to wake him up.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's physical contact.
Sure.
Okay, so we've got physical contact. It says the chains fell off. The gate opened of its own accord. A light shone in the prison. These are all affecting the physical environment. The
Exactly.
ability to make human sounds. He spoke to Peter.
Right.
Um, the only thing that we really, and he appeared. Okay, he appeared of his own accord, of his own power. The
Right.
same thing we see in the paranormal. So of the big five, we've got four. The only thing we don't have is the ability to confirm the electromagnetic interference or
But now
interruption.
let me ask you something. In a case like this, you know, and this happens also in paranormal investigations, where one person is able to see, hear, sense,
Ah,
witness,
wait.
and
Oh,
everybody else is going, "Huh?
right
What?
on. Okay. Okay.
Hey, did you guys see that?" And everybody's looking like, "No." Yeah.
Okay. So you want some more?
Yeah. Go.
Okay.
Go.
So, all right. So, we've got the story of Balaam and his donkey. You ever heard that one?
No.
Okay. It is really a pretty good story. Uh, so this is from Numbers in the Old Testament again. It says, "And the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he, Balaam, was riding upon his ass, and his two servants were with him. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass turned aside out of the way, and went into the field, and Balaam smote the ass to turn her into the way. But the angel of the Lord stood in the path of the vineyards, a wall being on this side and a wall being on that side. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself unto the wall, and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. And the angel went further, and stood in a narrow place, where there was no place to turn either to the right hand or to the left. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the ass with a staff. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and she said unto Balaam, What have I done unto thee, that thee hast smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, Because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in my hand, for I would now kill thee. And the ass said unto Balaam, Am not I thine ass, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever accustomed to do so unto thee? And he said, Nay. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. So, I don't know if dogs will talk in heaven, but that is a pretty
Let me
cool
tell you
story.
something. If I had an animal start talking to me, I'd be like, "What?"
Well, it didn't even phase Balaam, he
Yeah,
starts
this
talking
happens all
to him,
the time.
I'll beat you,
You know,
and it's like,
Mr. Ed or something.
I'd
It's
have
like,
been, I'd have
no,
been freaked out right
Wilbur.
there,
Uh, uh,
So,
no, that's what I'm saying, and I know that is like what this is like run of the mill. Your animal talks to you and asks you why you hit him. It's like or hurt her.
yeah.
But it's like okay, right about then. But in other words, and then it the ability to see what was obviously what the animal was seeing.
Okay, so we see this in the paranormal. We see animals react to things.
Yes,
Children see things that we can't see. It's very
yes,
selective. We also see this in the alien phenomena.
yes.
And Dr. Carlos or Turner's list. Let's see. Let's flip over that real quick because she had a list of 12 things. I'll just kind of run through this for you. The aliens can alter our perceptions of our surroundings. They can control what we think we see.
Yes, I've heard
They,
of
they
that.
can be present with us in an invisible state, or they can make themselves only partially visible. I got something for
All right.
that too. Uh, let's see. Abductees receive marks on their bodies. Uh, let's see. Female abductees often suffer That's a big word for me. Um,
Gynecological.
there you go. Problems. A surprising number of abductees suffer from serious illnesses they didn't have before their encounters.
Right.
Um, see, abductees often suffer more than one sort of alien during the or encounter more than one sort of alien during an experience, not just the grays. Every possible combination of a gray, reptoid, insectoid, blonde, and widow's peak. Um, abductees report being scoffed at, jeered at, threatened by their alien captors. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Um, let's see. Abductees, virgin cases, report being taken to underground facilities where they see grotesque hybrid creatures, nurseries of hybrid human fetuses, and vats of colored liquid filled with parts of human bodies. Let's see. Also, aliens come into homes and temporarily remove young children, leaving their distraught parents paralyzed and helpless. Remember the guards with Peter. Um, let's see. So
How about the
there,
stories of changelings?
changelings. Okay, so like I said, can during an encounter they see many different kinds, and so when the angels in the Bible, so like when they went down to Sodom, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, so they went down to see if there would be 10 righteous men, 10 God-fearing men there. Well, when they went down there, the they looked just like men, and so the men of Sodom decided that they wanted to rape them. And of course, this led to Lot being taken out, and then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Um, so, when one of the things that in the Bible tells us, be careful to entertain strangers because thereby many have entertained angels unawares. They can look just like you or me.
Sure.
There's a lot. So, what can an angel look like? And so, one of the things that I believe. I didn't, most of my life I grew up with evolution. But
Hmm.
even when I came to believe the Bible, I thought, well, you know, how do we, you know, I'm looking at the timeline of the Bible, I'm looking at dinosaurs. I'm like, how in the world does this match up?
Where does this fit in? Yeah. What comes first, right?
What's true? Okay, so I really studied creation science, creation, just the story of creation, and uh, help me,
Well,
Marlene. What was I
this
talking?
is well, no, this is the thing. Lately, and this is what I have found, that a lot of academics and theories that they've proposed, let's say for the last 100, 150 years,
Yeah.
when it comes to discovery, archaeological discoveries or anthropological discoveries,
Mhm.
they put out this version, and then little by little they've been coming up with, hey, you
New
know what,
stuff.
those years were wrong. And it's taken a long time because a lot of these academics were full of themselves
Yeah.
and didn't want to say we made a mistake, or we like Piltdown Man, turned out it was a man, the mandible of a
Pig,
bamboo.
yeah,
It
pig's
was
tooth.
right. All that stuff. Same
Mm.
thing with dating, um,
Carbon
archaeological
dating. Yeah.
finds. They say, oh, it's dates from this and this. Like about a couple of
Hmm.
months ago, they discovered what they believe is Sodom and Gomorrah, and proof that it was destroyed. The equivalent. In other words, they found evidence in the surrounding area that it was equivalent. I want to say not like a meteor, but like a fireball. Like, in other
Hmm.
words, this was because a lot of times, you'll read certain things in the Bible that they'll say that was like that really didn't happen. But this, and by the way, this article it wasn't described in a religious um, source. It was a
Hmm.
scientific source where
Sure.
they had found proof that Sodom and Gomorrah, that they probably what fell on them was basically like a smaller meteor or fireball. Okay. And
Mm.
it scorched that. They found the ruins of the city that correspond, and even the area beyond it, like it obliterated everything. All right.
Mhm.
And now they're finally getting down because remember, considering, all these ruins are basically, you have to really go down. And also a lot of the aerial photography now, or from the satellites, is helping also to basically locate these, what do you want to, these ancient cities that you just couldn't see them. So
Mhm.
in other words, you could say, okay, they were obliterated by a fireball, technically speaking, but also you could argue that God was the one that sent the fireball. You see what I'm
Well,
saying?
yeah, that's what the Bible says, and
Right.
so if the Bible isn't true, Jesus is the dumbest thing that ever happened,
Well,
because, well, no, hear me out, because if the creation story isn't true, if sin isn't real,
right.
then Jesus was a deluded lunatic. But what we know, what we read, does not give us that, not even a little bit, that because I know when I met Jesus in the book of Matthew, the King, Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and I grew up not with Jesus.
Okay.
And when I met him, I never heard a man speak like that. I never heard a man saw a man with that kind of courage. And I never saw a man with his compassion. And, the man, if he was a lunatic, he is the best lunatic I've ever seen, but,
Well,
that's where we got to stand, because it's either true or it isn't. Now here's what when we get back to the paranormal,
right.
okay? We have something that is causing the phenomena. The in those five things, those five categories, we got something causing those phenomena. Okay, it's not our
Well,
imagination.
this
And
is
what
the
we
thing.
see,
If you go by, and like I said, unless and even then, near death experience will tell you, the
mm,
NDEers that will have that there's an in between place. You don't, your physical body obviously doesn't work anymore.
well, why do we say that? Because
Well,
remember, we can't say something unless
it
we have
depends. Okay,
something to tell us.
we term death in, the official is when the body, and then I know, as a matter of fact, I was talking to somebody before, it was when the brain would cease to work. That was
Sure.
basically.
Physical death.
the litmus test for that somebody was dead.
Hmm.
All right. You remember once it was the heart, then they said no because, the brain, you can have brain activity. And I even heard
Hmm.
that they've even brought back people that have had zero brain activity. They've been able to resuscitate them.
Hmm.
But I know that there's a point where you say, okay, this body cannot sustain life no matter
Sure.
what. That's it.
Sure.
And that's what we consider in our reality as death. Your body can no longer sustain life. The spirit, the animus, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be people like, that, let's say the atheist, that's it. When you die, that's it. It's over. And then, you have the agnostics and then
Let's
people
put it
that
like
believe.
this: they used to be atheists.
Yeah, then they
So,
get the big surprise.
yeah,
Well,
surprise,
exactly. But the ones that think that you or your
Hmm.
existence is finite, and once your body is done, that's the end of you. That's it.
Well,
There's
and
no more
okay,
consciousness.
so if that's the case, and I'm going to say something. Well, I'm not going to say it. But what
Yeah, go
more
ahead.
value are we than a bug?
Of course. I mean, it all depends. Of
And
course,
so,
life is life is life.
so the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 2, and it says that the Lord said, "Let us make man. Let him make him in our image, after our likeness." And so, when he formed man of the dust of the earth, and he breathed life into him. So, what is life? Is it breath? When does life start? This is the big argument with abortion and things like that. When does
Right.
life start?
Exactly.
What is life? But we also got to understand what is death, because
Wow.
if the world is millions of years old, okay, now hear me out.
No, but
So
are you talking physical death or spiritual death?
I'm
If there's such
talking
a thing,
I'm talking physical death.
physical
Okay,
death.
so
Physical death is when the body, whether you're an animal, an insect, or a human being, that body
why?
cannot is not animate anymore.
Why does that happen? Is it natural
Normally,
causes?
it's because you would either think injury, okay, or
Okay.
whatever is needed to maintain whatever it is that sustains life, whether it's your heart,
Mhm.
your circulation, your brain. You either have a grievous injury, or from, let's say, old age, stuff wears out. Something eventually goes, like your car. There's always you could take great care of it. There will
Mhm.
always come a point where it just doesn't work
Sure.
anymore. And I think that's the same thing. And always the debate has been, well, what happens to us, our self-awareness, our spirit,
Mhm.
our soul, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. And I'm asking, so I guess what I'm asking is, where are we looking for these answers? And
Wow.
so that's the key. Where are we looking for the answers? Are we trying to fix a truck with a Betty Crocker recipe book? If we're looking for the answers to life, and we're looking for the answers to the paranormal, what is fulfilling the evidence?
Okay,
And
but
that's what
this
I'm
is
talking
this
about.
is this is what I have found, Bob.
Sure.
People, and I know that, there's a lot of mediums out there that get paid because, and I understand when people are in grieving over a person that's died, and they're
Hmm.
desperate to communicate with that person.
Sure.
And you'll have mediums that and this was even from years, spiritualism, that they'll be able to bring back the dearly departed. I
Hmm.
think, I'm based on my observations and my experiences and just my belief, that once you die, this body is no longer whatever. This is your moment of death. That's just the way it is. A cycle of life.
Hmm.
You realize there's a realization, whether the moment you're in the presence of the divine, that you realize you don't need that body. You don't need any of the material things that you need to sustain life here, because you don't have a body. Okay, so you move on into the presence of the divine. In other words, you really don't really want to have that much to do with this plane anymore, with the
But how
earth.
do we know that?
That's what I think. I think that what happens is a lot of the ones that get stuck are the ones that usually are around. The ones that get stuck they don't realize they're dead. They might have died under anesthetic, or very suddenly, or they just don't remember, or they're scared. Okay. Even if they weren't religious, all of a sudden they'll think of the heaven, and they think that they're going to be punished. And even though they're like they're still self-aware in their mind, they're thinking, when you're dead, like, how could I be? But this like this in between place, which by the way must be a horrible place to be in, is better than, if you fear something, than going to be punished or judged, whatever it is their expectations are. Because remember, just as when we're alive, All
Mhm.
right. Your perception is your reality. All right. And I think that what happens is that that individual, or sometimes you will have people that get very attached to physical things. And I'm sure you know people that are alive that are more materialistic than others,
Oh yeah.
and they become entrenched, and it's their thing, their house, their stuff, their whatever. And they want to stay there, like that part of them wants to stay there because they think they still want it, especially
Mhm.
if they've been, let's say, living in a house for a really long time, or just their
Sure.
personality. It's their personality. Or in some cases, you have what I find, which is the what motivates human beings when they're alive:
Okay.
revenge, anger, love sometimes, but I hate to say it. Some of the darker feelings sometimes are the biggest anchors, I think, to a human soul. Okay. Or in some cases, believe it or not, is that they need to tell somebody what happened to them, or acknowledgement, or or let's say sometimes I think things happen to certain human beings that they think either their family or loved ones that sometimes they even haven't had contact with. They want to let them know either they're okay, or this is what happened to me. All right. Maybe
Okay.
I got killed and buried in somebody's, under a tree somewhere in the middle of the forest. And my family thinks that I'm alive or that I'm okay, or just like they never get that chance. And it's almost the same thing that human beings have when they're alive. And I think sometimes along that way, a human soul can kind of get stuck, held back by a variety of reasons. Everybody's different. It,
So
and then some at some point I'm sure you've heard the story about people describing where they'll have loved ones come for them, to like
mhm.
follow them. I've had theories where they say somebody, let's say, that's died suddenly, unexpectedly. They were under anesthetized. Maybe they were getting an operation, or maybe they were, medicated, heavily medicated. They don't. They miss the "you died" part. Here comes their mom, their dad, their aunt, their cousin, their brother, whoever comes for them that's deceased, and they're like, "I'm not going with you. You're dead." In other words, the "you died" part. They're like looking at themselves, and they're like, "No, you're dead." They still they haven't. They're like behind the part of acceptance, I guess, if you want to look at it,
Mhm.
of that they're
So
dead.
so so we're looking at this, but we don't have any evidence for that.
Oh, of course not. And that's why there's so many reality shows.
So so what I and so that's why I say we can't say something unless we can provide some kind of
Well,
evidence for it. And
let me tell you something. Those shows are
so
not built. Those shows are built just totally on exactly what you're describing, trying
and
to provide
sure,
proof.
sure, okay. Um, but if I have something that has proven reliable and
Okay.
it testifies about this very subject we're talking about,
Okay.
and it has proved reliable in everything else concerning the paranormal, life, archaeology, creation, and all
Mm-hmm.
that,
Right.
should I believe what I want to believe, or should I put some stock in what this says? And so when we get back to it, we're talking about where does life begin? If it's from a alphabet soup, then there's no purpose in life. There's no meaning to it, and
Right.
it doesn't matter. Um,
Right.
but if it is the gift of God, okay, and then we get to the fall of man, where sin entered the world.
Okay.
So, and I think this is where we really kind of lose focus, because if sin is real,
Okay.
the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23. Death is a judgment of sin.
Okay.
Everybody is guilty. It's not a natural occurrence. When God created the earth and everything, the universe, everything,
Right.
he said it is very good. There was no death. They didn't eat animals. Every plant and herb of the field is yours to eat. He gave them one stipulation: don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You know,
Okay.
but you know how kids are. Whatever you tell them not to do, they're going to go
They're gonna
do it.
do it.
That's the sin nature, and we all have it. And so, the Bible tells us that death is a judgment of sin. And so, then we can look at certain instances. Okay, talking about there's only 2 instances in the Bible
Okay.
where the human spirit came back. Okay, we have the
Okay.
transfiguration on when Jesus was the one time that he allowed his divinity to shine through. Now at that, Moses and um, Elijah appeared, and they spoke with Jesus. And in Luke, it says that they talked about his upcoming death in Jerusalem. But it doesn't say that they spoke or communicated with Peter, James, or John in any fashion. And what didn't they do? They didn't stick around. So getting back to, talking about like a visitation. For
Right.
someone who believes in the Lord, this is entirely possible under the Lord's permission. But someone who does not, okay, that's not going to happen. Now, there was another instance where human spirit came back, and that was in I think it's 1 Samuel 28, where Saul had journeyed so far from the Lord that he went to go see a medium.
Okay.
And when Saul first became king under the Lord's direction, because that was the law of the land of Israel, to put all the mediums out of the land. And so he went to see a medium because the Philistines were coming, and he wanted some advice on what to do. And
Right.
so she says, "Well, why do you tempt me? Because everybody knows that Saul is, he'll kill the mediums." And he went. Of course, he was disguised when he went there and said, "Nothing will happen to you." So she says, "Who do you want me to conjure up for you?" And he says, "Conjure up Samuel." And she says, so she does her thing or whatever, and then she lets out a loud scream. She says, "Why have you deceived me? For thou art Saul." Now, something very different happened here. Whatever she was used to, this is extremely different. He said, "Tell me what you saw." She says, "I saw God ascending out of the earth." And so after that, the Samuel speaks to Saul, and he pronounces the judgment on Saul. "You and your sons are going to be with me tomorrow." And there was a long conversation.
Right.
What do we see in our EVPs? Very short, one word, one phrase communications. But at the
Okay.
transfiguration and when Samuel came back to talk to Saul, these are these are conversations. And
Right.
so um, the other thing is, if we look at the story of Lazarus and the rich man, okay, in Luke chapter 16. So Lazarus, he was this poor beggar, and he used to just be laid at the rich man's gate, hoping for some scraps or something, but never got them. So, but the rich man, he was a celebrity. He would have been a religious man because uh, we can tell because he says Father Abraham. Of course, only the Jews believe Father Abraham. Um, in order to be a celebrity or high status, you would have had to have been a member of the synagogue and all that stuff. You just if you didn't obey the Sabbath and play the part, you had been ostracized. And so we know that this guy, he was. It says that he fared very sumptuously. He had extravagant dinners,
Right.
and so whatever we think about their judgment, how they came to it, it's really not given to us. But Lazarus, it says Lazarus died, and he was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man died, and he was buried. And the next thing we see is him in torments, being Hades in torments. And of course, this is speaking of torment by flame.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we look at this, and they have the conversation, yes, he says, "Father Abraham, send Lazarus over, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and touch the tip of my tongue." So evidently, it's pretty hot.
Right.
And so, but Abraham says, while in life you had your good things, and Lazarus his evil things. And he said, besides that, there is a great gulf fixed where he cannot cross to you, nor can you cross to here. And he says,
Okay.
so then the rich man says, "Well, send him back to my house, because I have 5 brethren, lest they end up in this place." And Abraham says, they have Moses and the prophets, talking about the Bible, the Old Testament at that time. But he says they have Moses and the prophets. If they do not believe them, what would make them believe the one should rise from the dead? And so, one thing about being with the Lord is that people, it's home. We're strangers in a strange land, and
Right.
so when people go to be with the Lord, they aren't all that enthusiastic to come back here
Exactly. They're
to
not.
this. And
They're not. It shouldn't
so,
be.
but if we don't have power over death, and we've got this sovereign God who gives life and pronounces death, as a wee person that I am, what makes me think that I can escape any kind of judgment? Because the Bible's very clear that no one is going to escape either salvation or judgment, whichever they choose.
Right.
And so when we've got the forensic evidence, we've got the millimeter. It just doesn't support the human spirit. Now, the human spirit is real. It's the soul. Jesus emphasized the value of the soul above everything else. He said, if your left eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it's better to be maimed than to enter into hell whole. And he wasn't telling us to maim ourselves, but at any cost not to seek sin. And
Exactly.
so the soul, Jesus emphasized the soul so much, and he died for our souls, not that we're going to escape death. That's not what he died for. And throughout the New Testament, we see this. Believers fall asleep all the time. All the apostles fell asleep. They died. They were martyred. They were eyewitnesses to him. So, that kind of rules out that conspiracy theory thing. But the um, the soul is so important, and it is
Of
so
course it is.
devastatingly important. And so when we look at the paranormal, if we're looking at it through the eyes of what we see, and
Of
I think
course.
that's where we're not taking into account the evidence and the testimony that has shown us, because those two stories that I read about the angels, that's
Right.
two stories. The Bible is full of them. It is
Okay.
full of them. There were so many stories. My agent said you need to take a lot of that stuff out. He said you're beating a dead horse here, and so
Well,
but
the thing is this, that
sure.
there is so much. Okay, and whether you want to believe, maybe there's certain knowledge that while we're alive here on this earth, we shouldn't have it. We shouldn't understand it. And sometimes we get glimpses
Mhm.
of it. Okay, but maybe we don't have that total understanding because it would make life very difficult or unlivable living as we in our dimension.
Mhm.
You understand?
Sure.
It would just be like we couldn't. We would be overwhelmed. All
Mhm.
right. Same theory, and I'm sure you've heard it that they've said, "Oh, are they ever going to disclose that there's really extraterrestrials here?" And then they'll say, "Well, you know what? The supposedly and ultimately the reason they're going to give is that the majority of people couldn't handle it." One thing is to see it on the movie, and another thing is to have these theories. But if
Mhm.
they ever came out and actually said, "Yes, officially, we're being visited by extraterrestrials," there's a bunch of people that run around like their heads were on fire
Mhm.
that they couldn't. All right.
Mhm.
Because and again, everybody's different. Everybody's makeup, emotional is different. Some people they couldn't square it in their head. My point
Mhm.
being that is not as much as we want knowledge or understanding, sometimes to be able to function in the world we have right now, it is what it is. There's just certain things that maybe it's better not to have the knowledge. Okay. Sometimes you're better off, even though sometimes when we quest for knowledge, we think we understand that once I know it, and then after the fact, you go, oh, that was a mistake because you can't undo it. You can't
Well,
unsee it.
okay. So if somebody lied to you, and I
Uh
know
huh.
this has happened to you because it happens to everybody.
Of
Somebody
course.
lied to you, and after you find out, maybe not from them,
Hmm.
would you rather not have known?
No, you do want to know, but it
Sure.
depends. But see, but a lie, let's say, like you said, you found out a lie or somebody deceived you, whatever the case might be, and you find out one way or the other immediately or long after, and then you look. But see, some of those things, it's almost the human condition. All right, it happens.
The truth
Okay,
is
but
hard.
there are some, but if you start talking, because because let's face it, it's not an understatement when they say humans, we are creatures of habit.
Hmm.
And we all like our habits and our reality to be this, and I do this, whatever it is, whatever your life is, whatever part of the world you're at, this is your life. And we function better. I hate to say it like that. But when you get something so disturbing, so out of what you think your reality is, and all of a sudden your edges start becoming fuzzy,
Hmm.
okay? A lot of people will have a problem functioning, like being able to say, okay, because see, that's the thing, that's the door that opens. And then, well, if that's possible, or if that's true, let's say extraterrestrials, what else is there that I've either been told or understood didn't exist, or was a fairy tale, or that's just what else is out there?
You
And
know,
then their reality starts going like this. And for a lot of people, the majority of human beings, when their reality starts doing this, they're like, they shut down, because it's we like what we like, as far as
sure.
uh, and I think that in some cases, I'm not talking extra, some knowledge, I'm not going to say it's forbidden knowledge, but there's some knowledge that for some reason it's just that we don't know, and there's a good reason that we don't know.
Oh yeah, there's
And maybe
mysteries
once
all
we had
over.
that knowledge, we'd be sorry. It'd be like, man, can you please put me back in my ignorance? Thanks. I don't want to know this anymore. I don't want to know this.
You know, I
Like
thought
you asked, what
that's what I
happens to
thought.
us after we're dead? Maybe there's a reason. The only time we really truly know is when
Oh,
we're dead.
oh, we don't want that. We don't want that.
Like as
When we look at the rich man, and the Bible is really specific about judgment, and you know, it is so much better to know the truth
oh
here.
no, no. I'm
Um,
not saying I'm not talking about truth or lie. There's certain things that you might not know,
mhm.
because let's say, I'm sure you've heard all these stories of people that have had near death
Yep.
experiences.
Yeah,
They'll
I
come
heard.
back,
Yeah.
and they have, sometimes they're different, sometimes they're very similar, or they have this general type of pattern. Even though
Hmm.
you have outliers that they have some really totally, but but they're but eventually, though, you never really have, they in other words, they can just relate to what happened to them at that moment, when maybe their heart stopped beating, whatever it is, whatever caused them to have that near death experience. Normally, you hear people not wanting to come back, all right, wanting to stay where they're at. That did Sometimes many of them do come back because they either have children or a loved one that they don't want to leave behind. All
Hmm.
right, which kind of, if you want to call it heaven, that idea of the heaven, because otherwise, why would you want to stay there if it was a horrible place? All right. But really, all these questions that we have, anybody that does paranormal investigations, there's a lot of unanswered questions. And I'm saying, I'm all, because I've done investigations,
Sure.
but there's some things that, especially like what I said, you can't reproduce it in the lab. You can't write a model and say, do this. And then when you do that, then you do this, and then this will happen. Nobody's
Yeah.
come up with that. Sometimes some things are better to remain a mystery until you're there, because that's just the way it is. It's not a lie. It's just a
No.
lack of knowledge, that maybe once you
Yep.
are dead, that you're not alive, then I get it. Now it's, yeah, this is a good thing, because it would make living life difficult. It would impair you, maybe, to have this type of knowledge, because maybe, a lot, you have to think overall, as far as the way we're built. I mean, whatever your religious beliefs are, whether you think, okay, heaven, hell, this is what's going to happen after I die, judgment, the pearly, whatever it is that
Mm.
that you think, or you've been taught to expect as what happens after your physical death, whatever that might be, it's something that that it happens when you get there. And I do believe though that some people it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Also, you get
So
what you expect.
we've only covered half of this.
Okay.
So when we talked about the examples in the Bible, because and you said it about the angels. They're very
Mm-hmm.
specific. They come down, and in
Right.
every instance where the angels come down, their job is very specific.
Yes.
And they do it, and they go back. You know, they don't stick around.
Right. They're
But
they're they're on a mission. It's like,
sure,
what's that? That from Mission Impossible, Mr. Phelps. This is your. Should you choose to accept it, kind of deal. Yeah, that's
well,
that's that's the idea that you get from as far as that you understand the angels, even though they've been portrayed differently, in the
sure,
media. But you always think
yeah.
of them as being on an assignment of some type.
So we get back to our evidence, right? If we get back to our circumstantial evidence, you know, now we know that, and the Bible talks about in Revelation, John talks about that he saw the vision before the throne, and there were thousands of thousands, and tens of thousands. And, for John, this could have been like trying to express a number to an exponent. Um,
Right.
and so, but that would have been 2/3. So that's still a lot. Now we know that there's a lot of angels. So the angels they have they have shown demonstrated the power. So they have the ability. They have demonstrated. So from John and from other parts of the Bible, we know that they have the availability.
Okay.
They're present. That we know that there's spiritual interaction in our world. We know that happens. So
Right.
so, but where's the motive? Where's the motive for the paranormal? You tell me a holy angel wants to come down to my basement and start throwing boards and stuff like that. So to
Well, but
scare
the
me?
thing is this: just because you don't understand the motive doesn't mean doesn't exist.
Wait a minute now. There's Are those the only angels? Okay, so the Bible is very specific, and I know there's a theory out there, but there is the fallen angel.
Right.
Jesus talks about a lake of fire made for the devil and his angels. Revelation chapter 12 tells us about the great dragon, the serpent of old, Satan. When he fell from heaven, he drew a third of the stars of heaven with him, and the stars of heaven refer to angels. We know there was a revolt in heaven. And so if we got 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands, which is as many as the stars,
Mm-hmm.
if we've got that many, a third of that would be enough for plenty to go around down here.
Right.
Now, I know there's the theories that these came from the spirits of the angels that had sex with the women before the flood.
Right. Right. The
But
Nephilim.
the Bible's very, very specific that everything with the breath of life died. Now, I know we're talking about the spirit, but that takes into account that God is not in charge of life or death. And that's not true because God is sovereign. And so the sovereignty of God means that he is not subject to time or space or anything else.
Right.
Um, the sovereignty of God means that he alone controls his creation. He alone is Lord of his creation. And
Right.
so those angels who sinned in Second Peter tells us that they're in the pit reserved under chains of darkness. They are not free to roam the earth. But
Okay.
when we look at Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, it says the sons of God came before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And then it says the Lord asked Satan, he says, and where have you been? And he says, from walking up and down in the earth and walking to and fro in it. So and Peter also describes the devil as a roaring lion, walking about seeking whom he may devour. This is a tenacious adversary, and he's very cunning. He's very deceptive. Masquerades as an angel of light, and we see this over and over again in satanic cults.
Right.
So when we look at this,
In
we've
what
got
way? When you say satanic cults, how's that? You drew a
Okay,
parallel.
um, so in the book I wrote about, oh my goodness, uh, let me see if I can find it. I have it right here. But there was a gentleman who is a believer now, but he used to be okay. So William Schnoblin,
Okay.
and so in Lucifer Dethroned, remember we talked about the alien list, and there was the bats, human bodies and things.
Right.
Okay, so here's an account. Now, William Schnoblin, he was a high-ranking member of the Church of Satan,
Right.
and so he claimed to have astral projected several times. But this one was different. Something happened different here,
Okay.
and so he says that he was taken in the body, much like an alien abduction. But this is through satanic worship. And so, if you don't mind, I'll just read this short
But let
account
me
here.
ask you something. In other words, he was doing meditating or something while he was a Satanist. This happened when he was a Satanist, is what you're
Mm-hmm.
describing.
Yes,
Okay,
before
go
he
ahead.
was
All right.
saved. Yep. So he
Okay, go ahead.
says, so he come into place. He said the throne room was filled with concrete and twisted steel girders, which formed an upside down cross behind the altar. Then the lights came on. The walls, which had appeared to be inward leaning smooth black stone, were starkly revealed to be clear glass holding back a transparent green fluid. Floating within the fluid were dozens, if not hundreds, of naked human bodies. They were all dead, most with expressions of exquisite terror etched in a rictus on their frozen faces. Many of them were mutilated in manners which sickened even me. For the most part, this grotesque aquarium like display consisted of young people. All but a few seemed barely adult, and there was a poignantly large number of infants and toddlers floating among the rest. It was like they were preserved, floating in formaldehyde or some other godforsaken substance, like a butterfly collection from hell. And then he goes, um, okay, so if, as William stared at the scene, a pillar of light burst forth onto the altar, and a huge being appeared in it. One moment he appeared to be a normal, getting back to your shapeshifter,
Right.
be a normal but incredibly handsome man. The next he had the face of a bull, and the next the face of a beautiful woman. So next, William claims to have been laid on the altar as people in priestly robes came in. He remembered hearing their bare feet slapping on a stone floor. I don't know what it is with the paranormal footsteps, but you know. So anyway, so then his tour guide that was there at the time, he said, "You have tasted the illumination of our master, the light bearer, and have been found worthy to receive the light. My guide told me to surrender yourself to the light." So in 2 Corinthians in the Bible, 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." And so, when we look at this, we've got Satan and his angels. Now, those fallen angels did not lose their power.
Right.
God has limited them in what they can do, but they still possess the power that the holy angels have. They possess the power to do the big five. And so what we see in the paranormal and the alien phenomena over and over and over again is the character. So now we have something with the ability, the availability, and we got something with the motive. Because Satan hates us. We are made in God's image. And the Bible's very specific that when Satan was created, you know, he was the highest of angels, most beautiful of angels. But then he had this pride,
Mm-hmm.
and the pride of Satan caused him um, caused the fall of Satan, and the pride of people causes our fall. The same thing. We don't believe
Let me
that
ask
this
you
God
something.
exists.
When
So
he
sure,
had that experience, what did he interpret it as?
he didn't know. So when he come back, when
Right.
he was transported back, he was on the lawn, and of course we know this from aliens things too, that
Right.
there was
Okay.
a scorched earth and the smell of ozone, you know.
Okay.
But he said that there was no way that he could have gotten past his wife because she sleeps so lightly. to get out of it. Now, there's also instances in the Bible. Paul talks about
Are
it.
you? Let me ask, Bobbie. Are you saying that when people are having alien abductions,
That's
they're being
exactly what I'm saying.
abducted? Okay, that's what I thought you were going with it.
But I'm saying that it's not a spaceman.
No, no, no. I know that. I know what you mean.
Yeah,
What you're saying is that what people call alien abduction, as in extraterrestrials, like
yeah,
basically what it is that it's a that's
it's
whatever
demonic.
a satanic kidnapping or whatever, or demonic kidnapping,
Demonic.
or
It's
is
demonic.
that
Yeah,
what you?
that's
Okay,
exactly what I'm saying because that's where the evidence leads.
right.
We've got this thing that can do the big five. It fulfills the forensic evidence. It fulfills everything we see in the paranormal. You know, and like I said, there's so much information in the
But let
book.
me ask you something. Why would, let's say this guy, I could understand. He was a practicing Satanist. He like
Hmm.
asked for it. Like he put himself out there.
Uh-huh.
But why would, let's say, somebody that is not doing anything, why would they be abducted? Let's
Well,
use the word
sure,
abducted, or
sure.
whatever. Why?
Okay.
Why?
So now I know from interviews that you've heard this too, that
Mhm.
in fact you said it, that alien abductions are halted in the name of Jesus Christ. And so you ask the same question I do. Okay, if it's an interstellar space traveler, what the world do they care
Oh,
about
and
a
I've heard that.
peasant?
I've heard that people will say that
Yeah,
they've been having extraterrestrial whatever. I'm not talking about a sighting like a light in the sky.
no,
We're talking an
yeah,
actual abduction scenario
yeah,
where Jesus Christ, will stop it. And I
yeah,
agree with what you're saying. Like, okay, if this was a true extraterrestrial from another,
yeah.
whatever planet, whatever you want to call it, dimension,
Jesus, Jesus died 2,000 years ago. He was a peasant Jew. What do we care? You know.
right? It'd be like,
But
yeah, what
so
and I know what you're saying as far
so
as
this
what
this
one that
shows
shouldn't have any effect.
it shows authority. It shows authority of the name of Jesus over this creature. Now in Gary Bates's book, he talked about the research of it and the findings. And there was a secular group who did the research, and they said that every people group has been subject to alien abduction, this alien torment, except for
Hmm.
one, except for one,
Which is,
born again Christians.
but I've heard of people that have had it, even though later on, but they've had
But
experiences.
I'm not talking about people who claim to be Christian. I'm talking about born again Christian. Now,
Okay.
the born again Christian um, lives every facet of their life by the Word of God.
Okay.
That God, they have a living, breathing relationship with Jesus Christ. Through prayer, worship, um, they take into account who God is when they make their decisions about their money, about
Hmm.
their life, about their job, where they're going, whether if we're going out to a place or something like that, how they dress, how it's going to affect people. All these things take into account. And in Luke chapter 10, the disciples came back and they were ecstatic because they had power. They said, even the demons are subject unto us. And Jesus says, do not rejoice that the demons are subject unto you, but that your names are written in heaven. But he also said that I give you the power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and nothing shall by any means harm you. And so that is a very strict promise by
Hmm.
Jesus. And so, um,
But let me
you
ask
know,
you something. If,
sure,
let's say, because basically you're saying, because it's not what because at the end of the day, talking is free. It's not what you say, it's how you act.
it's how you live.
It's how you live, how
And
you act.
I'm so
In other words,
now we're,
if you could say, I do this, I do that, but the
no,
way you
no.
act, especially when nobody's around to see you,
Well,
that
there's
doesn't
that.
mean
Yes.
anything. It really
No.
means how do you act, whether
Yeah.
you're not looking for reward or fear of punishment. What is your conduct?
Yes. And
Because that's
so
really when it counts.
a lot of people, they go to church on Sunday and they by Monday morning or even Sunday
Yeah, all right.
by the time the football game starts,
Yes,
they have totally forgot it. And
exactly.
but for somebody who has committed their life to Christ, and this is what Christ told me, he's important. Not only is he important, he's the most important thing. And you know, eternity is a very long time.
Of course.
And so really what what we ought to do with this information is decide for ourselves. But
Of course.
we should invest in, you know, what how can we know this is true, and how can we know something is true?
Of
And the
course.
evidence never lies. The evidence never lies. And so when we look at something as deceptive as the paranormal and the alien phenomena, we have got
Well,
to go to the evidence.
of course, but you're not the first person that's told me, you know what? Everybody looks at these things as two separate things, like
Yeah.
alien, UFOs, ufology, like this is over here,
Mhm.
and paranormal, whether you want to, it's like two separate camps.
Sure.
And yes, and then then there is that theory of people saying that they consider that these aliens, whether you want to call them grays or whatever, God
Yeah,
knows,
whatever they look like, they
like
could be
whatever they look
anything.
like,
So
that basically they're demonic. They're
mhm.
not an extraterrestrial life form from another planet as we think, that are here studying us for whatever reason. It's like, how much do they want to study us? But
Yeah.
it and I agree. But I will say, I think that whatever kind of person you are, if you want to look at it as a safeguard, you don't do it either for looking for reward or in fear of punishment, because that doesn't count. That really doesn't count. It's, what do
No,
you
it's
do? What
love,
is your moral compass
love.
tell you? Especially when there's nobody. You know how, when you're alone and nobody's going to be there to either pat you on the back or go, "Hey, what are you doing?" You know,
Yeah.
this is really, really, this is when it really counts. Okay, what
Mhm.
do you do? Do you do the right thing? Do
Well,
you
and
do
if
whatever? Do you
okay,
say the right thing? Do you, to the best of your ability? You
but if we're
understand?
just talking about morality,
No, I'm not. When I
there's
say
no
moral compass, I mean as in what feels right to you as far as right and wrong. I mean, let me tell you something. To me, you, and I'm sure you went through it. Even as children, when you do something wrong, you know when you did something wrong.
oh yeah, I
It's
still
like, you
do.
know it. You
Just
might,
because
and it makes you feel uncomfortable because you're like, "Oh boy, I did that. That was wrong." And then there's different types of wrong. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it's some
mhm,
minor stuff, and then of course, there's huge things like when people commit murder and heinous. That's there's a whole
sure.
range, but
But
unless you're a psychopath, what is right and what is wrong.
mhm,
All right.
but
And
when
I
we're
guess
talking,
there's a difference is, you're not going to do that, not because you really think it's wrong, but because you're afraid of punishment. There's a difference.
well, and when I'm talking about um, with the paranormal, with this authority,
Mhm.
that's the authority. So when you belong to Jesus, you
Yes.
know, you are His. His authority is on you when it comes to this. And so when we look at like exorcism, if you look at the Jewish exorcism, okay,
Right.
have you ever studied that at all?
No, not really. I know that it exists, and I know
Yeah.
that, but I've never really seen.
Well, there was so Jewish exorcism. It consisted of like up to 10, 12 guys, but they had to be pious men. And so they would go in and they would do a lot of screaming and they would slap the person, and yell at the demon or whatever. And they would say that, there'd be a drop of blood come out of the fingertip or the toenail, and they say, well, the demon come out there or whatever. But this was how they cast demons out. Now, when Jesus came along, he did it with a word, you know, be silent and come out of him. This was way different.
Mhm.
This was astronomically different. And so, the Pharisees, the religious leaders of that time, they accused Jesus. Well, he casts out demons by the prince of demons. And Jesus is like, okay, well, if I cast them out by the finger of God, by who then do your sons cast them out?
Let
And
me ask
so,
you something, Bobby. I'm going to ask you a question. If you were the
sure,
devil, if you were Satan, and you wanted to corrupt the human soul, cause as much suffering, anguish, you name it, everything that's antithetical
you
to
betcha.
human beings, because when human beings they flourish, would you really possess somebody to twirl
Nope,
their head around, or would you possess them and
nope,
really get a lot of mileage out of by
no.
making them do heinous acts sometimes, pretending to be
Now,
normal?
certain cultures that creates fear where they worship their deity, their false god.
Yeah, but what
But
I'm saying
but
is,
in
do you think that when people, I'm gonna give you an example, some of these serial
sure,
killers, or people that kill people, like,
sure,
that you think the anguish, because it's besides the taking of that human life, the ripple effect that it has to all those around it, whether it's the family, the even the people that investigated, everybody
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
it's such a
Dark
negative
thing. Yeah.
effect that keeps giving
Yep.
way beyond the moment of that event. Do you think that something that is so, like you said, hates humans, where do you think he's going to get more mileage from that? From somebody that he can get to do stuff like that, kill a child, kill another human being,
No
killed a lot of
deception.
human beings, or somebody that, like what they do in Hollywood, that they spit out pea soup or do all that weird stuff. That's window dressing. You know who you really get
Yeah.
mileage out of?
Person
Somebody
that
that you can get to do that. And not only
so
kill that person, or where you say torture or whatever.
mhm,
That's the one. And by the way, I'm going to say this. When you mentioned that gentleman, the one that's a Satanist,
mhm.
you know what? There's a bunch of them out there that act like Satanists, but they're not stupid. They don't call themselves Satanists because they don't ever, but they're not going to become the prime suspect.
Well, this guy messed
I'm,
up. You
they
know,
act very
you know,
normal, very, oh,
yeah, and so that's what I'm talking about is, Satan's not a one-trick pony, but his
yeah,
tricks are all the same. We see the same three temptations that we see in the garden throughout all of all of time, but
yes.
he's going to get a lot more mileage out of in this culture. I'm
Oh,
saying one, I don't exist, and the deception, and saying that not
of
only
course.
do I not exist, but if God existed, he'd show up like an angel or something. He would do something
Let me ask you, how
huge.
many times have you heard about
So,
these serial killers when they interview the neighbors? They'll say, "Oh, he was such a nice guy," or
uh,
he was, normal. That's the usual. Some of them not, but most of them take great pains. If just a little bit smart, they want to blend in. You
yeah,
know, they
but it's
even
the
have
pride. It's
sometimes they marry and even have children, even if they're psychopaths, because it's like this is the window dressing I need.
so the
To keep
psychopath has the same sickness that Satan had. It's the pride. I can
right.
get away with this. I'm above
But they do
the law.
everything, if they're a little bit smart, they do everything so that suspicion, deception, of course, deception by any
Hmm.
means, so that I can keep doing whatever it is that they're doing, whatever it is. Okay.
Hmm.
And it depends. There's different variables, as far as intelligence. Sometimes you do have a genuine mental illness involved.
Hmm.
There's a lot of variables. But what I'm saying is, a lot of times we think monsters look like monsters, or they have monsters stamped on their forehead.
Yeah, but they don't.
Okay, and they're not. I do believe genuinely, exactly like what you said. Really, what we have to be aware of is deception, because that's the very nature. That's the nature of the beast.
Hmm.
Okay, and sometimes it's not obvious. Okay, it's not obvious uh, because that would be so easy. You already would know who to
Yeah, it
look
is.
to. It would be
It
so easy.
is.
It'd be like,
It,
oh,
it it is. It's incredibly easy, because we have this thing called sin, and all he does, rather than possess us, all he does is, hey, you know, and feed that lust, and
whatever it
it
might
was,
be, whatever it might
yeah,
be, whatever the
whatever
whatever
it is,
whatever the emotional mental makeup, the construct is of that person. And
yeah,
God knows we would never know, or would we ever want to know, what would take place in their head
sure,
that feeds their soul for them to do this. Okay,
sure.
that's why
So
I'm saying
now
it.
when we talk about this with the demon and the character, okay,
Mhm.
now we got to get to the question of, okay, so how do they look and act like this person that I knew, or this person that died there, or something like that? How how is it that they can do that? You know, and just like the angels can look like men, and one of the things that I think we really don't take into account is that, okay, so we look at everything that we see, all the different kinds of animals and birds, and just there's so many. There's
Right.
300,000 animals that we know about on the face of the earth, and in the ocean, I think it was like 285,000 or something like that. And they say that's less than a tenth of
Yeah.
what's in there. And so the incredible variety that we see in the stars and the trees and plants and everything else. So if God made that, and God
Okay.
made the angels, how
Okay.
many different types of angels did he make?
That's a good
And
question.
so, okay, and so Jesus talks about different kinds, and we hear about different kinds, cherubim, different descriptions of angels, different appearances, different powers. Jesus talks about, um, when the apostles couldn't cast out this demon, and Jesus said, well, you know, they said, why couldn't we cast this one out? And he said, because of your unbelief. He said, but this kind comes out by prayer and fasting. And then he talked about the where a house is swept and clean, and the spirit goes out of a man, and he wanders through dry places, a lot like we heard in Job, wandering the earth to and fro, up and down, and wanders through dry places. And he says, I will return to my house. And when he goes with him, he finds it clean and swept, and he brings with him seven more wicked than himself. And the last
Okay.
state of that man is worse than the first. And so, we see this in the Bible. We see a tremendous understanding of not just the power of the supernatural and the forensic side of it, and in the circumstantial evidence side of it, but we also see the character of it. We see um, the explanation of the differences, of the variety. And Satan is he's an imitator. He's the store brand. God's the real deal. And
Well, of
so,
course, and I think that as much as we want to understand it, I think just like there's certain things about God that our minds just can't encompass as
absolutely,
much as
yeah.
we want to or would
Yeah.
like to, but it's like, okay, that's it. This is
Yeah.
beyond my pay grade. You know, it's there's certain things that in other words, we understand there we do have limitations. Hello, whatever
Yeah,
you want to
yeah,
call it,
yeah.
our brains, our spirit, the combination. There's always going to be a limit as much as we want to say there's certain
Understanding of
things
God,
that we
yeah.
couldn't understand about creation, about God, about evil, about
Hmm.
goodness, about that we know it exists, and but we don't know the exact workings of why certain things happen.
Hmm.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
when they say bad things happen to good people, or or people that you say, well, that person didn't deserve that. In other words, the fair thing, like
Yeah.
we realize, well, I think that sometimes some things are going to be beyond explanation. Um, and I personally think that life is meant to be messy. You are meant to make mistakes and
Yeah.
overcome them. You're meant to do that. You can't
Sure.
if there was no obstacles, their life would be really boring. And I'm gonna end this because I'm already at the 2 hour mark. I'm gonna say, and I don't
Okay.
know if you ever saw this, Bobbie. This was an old Twilight Zone show. Okay.
Might have. I
And
don't know.
it was the episode was there's a robber, a thief, and he's being chased and he gets shot. They kind of like the police are after him, and the next thing he knows, he comes to, and he's in like this area, and it's really nice, and all these beautiful girls, and you he's a very well known actor comes up dressed in white, and he says, "Sir, whatever you want." And there's beautiful women, everything that he likes, the drinks, everything. And so he's thinking he's died and he's in heaven. So
Hmm.
he's all these beautiful women are always attending him. Nobody ever says no. He plays pool, never loses. There's no challenge.
Yeah.
So finally, he goes back up to the guy dressed in white, which you assume is either same, an angel or you know somebody there, and he goes, "Hey, this is I'm not happy here. There's no challenge. There's everything is I get whatever I want." He's thinking this thing about like heaven,
Hmm.
and then the guy starts grinning. He goes, "Who told you it was heaven?"
Yeah.
You know. My point
Yeah.
being that I think our nature is that we need to have our challenges to overcome them, to prove to ourselves, to have something that you face temptation, you say no. In other words, it's not supposed to be smooth sailing all the time. You're
Nope.
supposed to have these things that you're supposed to overcome. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You make a mistake, you learn from them. Life is supposed to be messy. That is the whole purpose of it. And this is more basic than paranormal or anything like that. But the, some people, like I say, sometimes you make mistakes and they're inconsequential, and sometimes you make mistakes and they have horrible outcomes that
Absolutely.
God can affect you for years and years. It's like
Mhm.
What do people do as an individual basis, which then we can go round and round on the free will thing. Like, how do you handle it? What do you do?
Yeah.
Okay, or what do you try to do? But anyway, on that note,
Well,
Bobbie,
I
I
would
want
like
to
to
yes, go ahead.
I would like to thank you for having me on your show. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to direct your listeners if they want to learn more.
Yes, I was about to ask you. I'm going
Oh,
to put
okay.
a link to your website,
Okay.
but for the podcast listeners, what is your website?
It's www.dwellerinthecellar.com.
I know I saw that. I saw that. I was like, this, what a website. That's the dweller in the cellar. I saw that. I saw that. And your book is already. I saw it's available on Amazon, right?
Yes, it is.
And what's the title of it? It's for my
It
paranormal.
is the Paranormal Hammer: Clear Answers in the Murky Realm.
Boy, there's a lot of murky
There is a lot of
questions.
murk.
There's a lot of murk. You got it. Again, Bobbie, thank. Are you going to be working on any other book, or is this just not
And
yet?
I work for a living. I just wrote this. I don't know. So,
You know what?
we don't,
Sometimes
I
it's
don't
a
know.
it's a work in progress. You become
Yeah.
inspired, and then if you put it together before you know it, you've got a book.
I wrote for like 15 years and I threw them all away. And, you know,
What?
be, yeah, well,
Why would you do that?
because they didn't honor the Lord. If I wrote a book that says I love Jesus and I let these books out, what does that do to his name? How does
But
that
let me ask you
how
something.
does that
Did you
reflect on
think?
it? So
Well, let me ask you something. What you wrote, was it truthful,
no, it
or
was
was
it was fiction, but I love the
okay?
character development and the stories and stuff. But
Oh, I
they were
understand now.
not. But they were not. Books that I could. My Savior died for these things. How can I
Right.
then publish them and say, hey, feast on this and let me, rake in some dope
Okay.
and
I
so
thought you
yeah.
were talking about nonfiction. I was thinking maybe he has
No, 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 no.
stories, things, experiences he's had, because sometimes experiences, they're ugly, but they're experiences. Some people can learn from others. Hopefully that's what you want.
Yeah,
People to learn from your own
yeah,
experiences so they don't make the same mistakes and find themselves in a difficult predicament, or
yeah,
that they have, and if you can show them this is how you overcome that situation. This is how it works.
yeah,
But again, Bobbie, thank you so much. It has been wonderful, and I
yeah.
want to
For me
wish you
too.
the best. Take
All
care.
right. You too.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.
Wow. Yeah. I was thinking that I was thinking for a minute there, I was like, he threw out 15 years worth of cases. I was like, why would you do that? Because the truth is, you know, unless it was like, if it's truthful, it's truthful. Like you say, you have cases. I mean, for the years I collected, I remember way back in the early 2000s, this was before the reality TV shows were taking off. I was contacted by a lot of different production companies wanting to, if I had cases that I could point them to. And it was like, I've got boxes of cases, but I can't, I can't give you these people's names or information, or for you to even contact them and ask them, hey, can I have your permission? Because that would be a betrayal of the confidence. And by the way, we're not talking here because it was a signed paper saying, hey, you're not going to talk about this. This was an understood agreement that you were not going to talk about what you helped them with. All right. Again, this was in the early 2000s, where this reality TV show thing hadn't taken off, and then everybody was desperate to have their story told. It was understood, regardless of the outcome or what happened or what was found or not found. People wanted to keep those things under wraps. Uh, so it was like, yeah, no, yeah, I've got lots of cases, but I can't tell you about them. I can't even give you the names, the phone numbers. I can't give you anything about them. I can tell you about some of them like how they have that, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Yeah, that I can do, but I know that what they were looking for was to go to the source, the actual person that had that experience, and blah blah blah. But yeah, there was a time when people, um, and I want to say the first one of the first shows that really started with that wave was Ghost Hunters with the Jason Hawes, and I can't remember his partner's name. That they were the Roto-Rooter guys, that plumbers by day, Ghost Hunters, and that they would have come pull up in these vans, and they would have all these equipment. And I'm thinking to myself, I remember seeing that. I was like, this is great entertainment, But I want to say 80% of the cases that I had gone to, you do that. And these people would be like, what? What are you doing? Who are all these people? What? You could not go in there and do that. You just couldn't. Because these people sometimes were, no, either they were really scared or the last thing they wanted was anybody, their neighbors or anybody to know there's something weird going on, you know. Uh, and like I said, in some cases, you even had people that their attempts to contact the clergy. And by the way, and I'm not talking strictly Catholic, different denominations, was either poo-pooed or dismissed, and I had a couple of cases where they were kind of like it's your fault. Like, what did you do? And they would say, oh, they like, oh, are you practicing occult practices or what are you doing? And they'd be like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yeah, you can tell me, like this person, this religious was basically calling them a liar and saying, no, you've done something. You've been practicing occult practices or something that you've brought this on yourself. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, by the way. I know it does happen. But there were some people that they had not done anything. They had not dealt into the occult. They weren't doing not even the Ouija. Not even, but they hadn't been doing anything like summoning spirits or and I'm not talking Ouija. I'm talking about for dark practices, occult practice. No, they were like in left field. They couldn't understand what was happening, why it was happening, whatever. And they got that feedback where they were like, why does this person, this whoever, you know, minister, priest, whatever, not believe us when we tell them we haven't done anything? We didn't bring it on ourselves. We're asking for help. Hey, you're the guy in charge of spiritual stuff. You're supposed to be our Calvary. And yeah, I did come across that quite a few times, or the most that they would get was like a blessing, and it'd be like, don't let's let's not overdo this. Like, don't get carried away. And you'd be surprised. I did a lot of cases where people were very intelligent. I take that back. Let's take the intelligent thing out of there. It could be anybody. But and I guess what I'm saying is they were very sincere. They were authentic. They were worried. They didn't understand why it was happening. And they were like, they just they had gone through the all the normal channels of trying to explain it, and they had come up against nothing. And I want to say that by that time, and the fear also feeds into the phenomena. All right, the fear feeds into the phenomena. And also one of the things that, and I'm glad he brought it up, that sometimes people or families, depending, or couples, depending, they kind of start to isolate. They start staying home. They don't go out. They worry. No laughter. And I tell everybody, one of the things I tell them is like, I want you to go outside. I want you to go to the park. I want you to open up the windows. I want you to open up the curtains. I want you to play happy music. I want you to laugh. I want you to look at comedies. No dark stuff. Give that a rest for a while. Put it on the back burners as far as entertainment. I want you to start watching stuff that makes you want to laugh. And they'd be like, huh? I go, yeah, do that. Okay. And it works. I'm not going to say it's a cure all, but it does something where the mind stops telescoping on that event or that anticipation of, did you hear that? That kind of deal. And that in and of itself basically takes back your, what's the word I'm looking for your telekinetic power, your fear, whatever. For people that say, oh well, that doesn't, I'm sure, have you ever walked into a room where somebody just had an argument, like two people? And you can say, well, I read their body language, but sometimes there's a tenseness in the air that you pick up on, because that's something that we manifest outside of our bodies. Whatever it is, whatever the words, the meaning, the intention. And it's the same thing when you're in fear, when you're anticipating bad things, when maybe you're even short on sleep and you're worried. All of this, it's like it feeds into that to make it. So when you start pulling away, and you start, like I said, you start laughing. You um, the no isolation, uh, that kind of breaks it. That breaks that pattern, because it's and that's another thing. Um, Sometimes people feel like God or the universe is picking on them, like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? And sometimes it's good when somebody like me, or when I would go, usually when I'm with another person, that I would say, you know what, I'm not going to tell you exactly, but I've dealt with other people that have had this experience, and they look at me like, yeah, oh my God, really? And what happened? Like, and you could tell that they had this mentality that they were like I mean, yes, I mean, you could see shows and whatever, hear stories, but when somebody actually tells you, there's other people who have had this experience, and it's like, oh my God. And what happened? I mean, they feel like that isolation, which, by the way, which is why group therapy works. When you listen to other people that have gone the same situation or very similar, that isolation starts to drift away. You stop feeling like, man, the universe is picking on me. Like, man, nobody loves me. And that right there, it's a process. It's a process. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that a lot of times in these shows, whenever they've had a team go in there, um, to investigate something, and there's something that's intelligent and doing whatever, a lot of people think it's like, like clap of thunder and it's over. Sometimes it's a process, and it starts with what's up here for the people that are involved. Okay. And as a matter of fact, in my book, Supernatural Safety, a DIY guide to the paranormal, I state there, that's why I wrote the book, that the people they give away their power. They think that somebody, whether it's a priest or a paranormal investigator or whoever, is going to come in there and take care of the whole thing, because they're powerless. And that's so far from the truth, because in reality, the ones that have the most power is that parent, that homeowner, that person, whatever, is like, hey, I want my life. This is the thing. And you deal with whatever it is, whether there is an admission of, hey, I was practicing things I shouldn't have. I got involved with things I shouldn't have. I got involved with people I shouldn't have. Yeah, or whatever. Or I have no idea. Sometimes, believe it or not, the point of origin is an attachment to an object. That's why something starts to happen when nothing had happened before. And people go like, they totally missed the boat. Because, see, this doesn't go from 0 to 60 overnight. Even though when you look at the movies, it makes you think that. Sometimes it starts to incrementally, like days, weeks, months, to something is like, okay, what is this? Sometimes it happens. Not only the noises, the nightmares, the this, that, whatever it is. All right. And it's the origin, when we start tracing back, that we start talking about, like, let's talk about this. Like, what happened when the first time and people start like actually talking about it. Like, oh yeah, and then, well, prior to that, and then okay, and then you ask them, well, what was going on right around that time? And most of 9 times out of 10, people have the regular stressors of everyday life. Well, this, what else, you know, and you either ask them, or sometimes they themselves, you'll see they'll light up like this, like ding, the light bulb goes up, and they'll go, hey, wait a minute, wasn't that the time that we got that wheelchair for Aunt Martha? Or wasn't that the time that we got that whatever at the curb? Or, and I hate to say this, because these things are expensive, by the way, wasn't that the time that we got that hospital bed for grandpa, so that, we could sit him up in bed? And they'll look at each other like, huh? What's spooky about, hey, repurposing a hospital bed that, we need for, let's say, somebody in the family? They're thinking, man, this is great. Or sometimes they're donated. You go on Craigslist, especially something like that, some type of medical equipment. Which, by the way, that doesn't mean you can't use stuff like that, but you need to bless them, sage them, basically cleanse them. Like, like if you ever took something that you would like disinfect it, if it was something for personal use and you knew it was used, not for spiritual purposes, but for hygienic purposes. Well, basically, you do the same thing. Sometimes if that hospital bed was, it could have, it could either be a spiritual attachment of the person that used it, that this was their place and they're still attached to that bed, and basically that spirit is still there. Okay. Especially if this was their end of their life, or there was suffering, or they were there. Or sometimes it's not even the actual spirit, it's the experience of what was experienced there: sickness, illness, uh, feelings of why me. But you know what? Not everybody makes their peace with dying, even if they're ill. A lot of people, even till the end, we all like to think that we all go off into the sunset. It's like, okay, it's okay, it's inevitable, but that doesn't mean everybody goes there like willingly. Other people question it, and especially if maybe this wasn't an older person, or this person thinks, well, I had more to live, I wanted to live more, and there's a resistance to death and they don't accept it. But there comes a point where it doesn't matter, what you want versus what your bodies can do. And sometimes that feeling, or what was experienced by the person using it, is still there. It's still there. And that's why sometimes you will have things that are experienced only in certain rooms. The rest of the house is great. Something like what he was saying. I went to that room and I had that one experience. Nothing had ever happened. I was sleeping upstairs with my sister and everything was copacetic. Next thing I know, I'm having a demonic type thing staring at me in the face. That's why I asked him, was it in the basement? The reason why I ask is, I'm not kidding. The most scariest stories that I've heard of people having sightings, that they could be I don't know, for some reason, basements or cellars, anything like that is like, that's like ground zero. Dark stuff, dark stuff comes out there. And again, that's why you have sometimes certain rooms. It's not the whole house. It's just that one room. That's the one. And then you ask yourself, well, what is it about the room? What happened in the room? Or is there something in that room that is the point of origin? And sometimes that's what I'm saying. Sometimes when you have people that are going through those experiences, they need, how can I say, like the role of a paranormal investigator should be somebody, even though you might know them, but let's say somebody that's not there to take sides one way or the other. Like, hey, I want feedback from somebody that's going to help me, like, look at it because right now my perception is emotionally tinged. I'm either scared or whatever. So I need somebody that's going to come in here and has no agenda, in the sense of, help me figure this out. Maybe you can see what I don't see. Or what do you know? Or what have you done before? And that's really what a true paranormal investigator should do. All right. Is basically help this person or persons sort it out to the point of something that they understand, whatever it is. Whatever it is. And again, I will say, this is not the norm, but there are times when you do encounter uh something there that you realize, this is not like, I'm going to, in other words, you need a religious person to come in here and bless this house. All right. And by the way, and that's another difficult, unless when the people contact you, they already, and even then you got to question it, or that you feel that somebody in the family is being obsessed, or not an out and out possession, but what's around is really trying to do a number, trying to take them over. That's a real difficult thing to broach with a family. Okay. By the way, this doesn't necessarily mean it has to be mnemonic. It could be a dead person. It could be a dead person. the ones that take them over. They want a body. They want a human body. Hey, I want to. I don't have any of my senses anymore. That what comes with a human body: taste, smell. They want that. Especially if I hate to say it, especially people that like addicts and stuff like that. They want that human body. They can't experience what they used to experience. So the next best thing is I need to slip into that person, and that's why sometimes you have uh, that. But anyway, that's like that's a whole nother show. But that sometimes is a difficult thing to broach with somebody when you say it. It's difficult, but at the same time, they'll be the first ones to say, "Yeah, I've noticed that this person has been acting unusual or something's that kind of deal." And again, there are some points where, as a regular paranormal group, you need to say, "Okay, I need to get you help in here that is not just like somebody's going to walk around with a Geiger counter or with an EMF. Well, nothing. That's not this type of investigation anymore. Okay, we need some. You need to bring in bigger guns, and even then, there's stuff that people can do. You know, like I said, not wanting to surrender to that, pulling back the fear, laughter, hope, um, things of that nature. But yeah, again, it's that's why I'm saying this thing with the paranormal investigations. It's very interesting, but I kid you not, any investigator who's ever done this for any length of time, all of them, all of them will tell you you got to have a boundary. And there are times when you must stop doing investigations for months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. You must stop it because if not, it bleeds over into your personal life. And that's when you hear these stories about investigators that have really difficult circumstances of attachments. All of a sudden, they start experiencing things in their homes, and it's like you've got to like pull back and live the life of the living. Because if not, I know this is going to sound like something out of a horror movie. The dead start coming to look for you all the time. Okay, and the dead sometimes are not nice just because they weren't nice people or because they're desperate. And I'm sure people have heard, that thing about if somebody's drowning, you got to be careful when you give them aid because if not, they could pull you in and you drown along with them. Same thing happens with the dead. Okay. You want to help them in some cases, especially if it's something, but you got to be real careful because if you don't pull back, you got to always remember you're the living. If not, you will pull them in and they will pull you in. They will, you know, that's why anybody it's like, yeah, I'm going to be taking a time off for a few months, but and the reason why I stress this again, when I say time off, I'm not talking a week, 2 weeks, a month. I'm talking months. You need to totally unplug yourself from that. All right. So all of a sudden, it's like you're immersed in life because if not, you will get pulled in. And I'm not going to go into details, but I've seen bad things happen because of that. People that just they get swallowed up by the research, by dealing with dead people with dead souls. Well, not dead souls, dead humans with souls that want some type of release of help or in some cases possession of the human body. It's a complicated kind of subject. But anyway, guys, I hope you liked the show. I really enjoyed talking to Bobbie. Um, you know, not the first time I've heard of that crossover between, our alien abductions in reality, not extraterrestrials as what we think of as an extraterrestrials versus are they demonic in origin. I've heard of that theory before. And I'm not ready to discount it either, one way or the other. Some of the things that you hear that supposedly some of these extraterrestrials do, if we go by mutilations and everything, you look at it and you're like, man, that's pretty bad. I mean, even like, if you are an advanced civilization, species, whatever you are, why would you need to do that? I mean, how many cows do you need to mutilate? How many? What's the purpose? And then, why would you need to mutilate if you're such an advanced um, species, civilization? I don't know what to call them. That you can travel interstellar or interdimensionally. You would think, you know how they used to have in Star Trek where the guy would just go zzz, and they could just, they could look at you without, zzz, like why can't they do that? Why are they having to pull things apart? Animals. Something there just doesn't. Nope. Something doesn't add up for me for that. So, but we'll see. Let's see what happens. I mean, we might never get an answer, but such is life. Again, guys, thank you for the time that you come and spend with me every week and come back. I have a lot of great guests in the wings. Till the next time, take care.